From the next day, appeals began to pour in to King Sejong again. Although there were many who agreed with the Crown Prince's opinion, the force of those who opposed it, led by Yang Wijing and Daesagan, was also formidable. The Crown Prince's opinion may seem good at first glance, but it is a truly dangerous idea. According to the Crown Prince's opinion, if the goal is good, there is no need to consider whether the means are right or wrong. This is a very dangerous idea. As the purpose is just, the means must also be just. In this way, the Dae-Confucian school, which agrees with the many-ware theory advocated by Hyang, and the Soyuz school, which agrees with the one-ware theory of orthodox Neo-Confucian scholars who claim that only Neo-Confucianism is correct, the Soyuz school, a fierce debate began between Confucianism and Confucianism. The debate that began in this way intensified at the same time as the implementation of the Jiangjiang Gengzhang, decided by King Sejong, and in addition, there were countless appeals, resignations, dismissals, etc. throughout the 6th year of King Sejong's Gapjin year. It continued, and this became the beginning of a fierce battle in which the educated class of Joseon was divided into two, called the Gapjin argument. The story of Hyang's announcement of political views and the debate between Hyang and conservative officials that arose in the aftermath immediately spread to those living in Hanseong, causing a chain reaction. The victims of that chain reaction were the children of prominent families. By the time our grandson enters the military service, it is certain that the Crown Prince will have inherited the throne or will be in real power. Looking at the Crown Prince's personality, he will not be able to take on a high position simply by faithfully studying the classics. Therefore, from now on, make sure to faithfully learn not only the classics, but also the hundreds of disciples. Yes, father. It's the same for you too. Where did the Crown Prince's passion come from? For the continuation of your family, you must also use your strength. Yes, father. The households of ministers and noblemen who observed the flow of affairs and sought to prosper their families began to study not only Neo-Confucianism, but also the 100 schools of disciples. Meanwhile, the families of the anti-Seiya faction were not just idle. We cannot ignore the fact that the chief minister and the crown prince are going down the wrong path. In order to bring the chief minister and crown prince back to the right path, a thorough argument is the only answer. You must thoroughly delve into the hundreds of disciples and find out the loopholes. Yes, father. Why is my grandson silent? The crown prince is the same age as you. So around the time you go out to government, it will be the time for the crown prince to come to the forefront. If you don't work hard from now on, you will bring disgrace to our family. Sosan, Xiaofun, you are still working hard. The guy who puts in so much effort is finally holding on to the intellects of Confucius. Abby, bring the whip right now. Father, calm down your anger. I told you to hurry and bring it. Thanks to a munchkin named Hyang, the cabs of boys from noble families in the capital city were never healthy. At around the same time, Hyang was reviewing past rice cakes. I feel relieved because I said whatever I wanted to say. And it was nice to feel like my Abima was on my side. Hyang spoke with a tired face. According to reports from internal officials belonging to the East Palace, there were a series of appeals from ministers who favored Hyang's views and those who opposed them. The amount was so great that many of the monks in Sungjiangwan were collapsing from overwork, and King Sejong even gave them special fish meals and tonics. Hyang, who was thinking about a blank piece of paper in front of her, burst into laughter. Is it fortunate that I was reincarnated in the early Joseon dynasty? If he had been reincarnated in the late Joseon dynasty and made a fuss like this, he would have immediately heard the cry of Salmonangiac, Thuan Lanze, and the deposed crown prince would have been put in the middle of the trouble if he did something wrong with the basics. Anyway, am I glad that there are ministers supporting me this time? Hyang paused for a moment, tapping his fingers on the west bank and looking in the direction of Junjiangjan. Vaccination will begin soon. If good results come from the cowpox vaccination, the scales will tip in favor of me. Hyang, who was speechless, turned his gaze to the ceiling and sighed. Huh, is it true, human affairs, and heavenly destiny? Sejong's 6 years. The first 3 days of the first month of Gapjin year. Start. Yes. As soon as the order of the Minister of Justice was given, many doctors who were waiting, officials who would conduct censuses at the same time, and soldiers who would guard them in case of an unexpected situation came out of the palace gate and marched in all directions, was built and dispersed. It's a fate. At the shout of "This is my name," heard outside the private gate, the entire family in the thatched hut came out and knelt down. The official who saw the family kneeling with puzzled expressions as to what was happening explained the reason. By order of His Majesty the Lord, we will be inoculating to prevent smallpox, so everyone, stand in line. Men should go in front of the medical center over here. and all women should go in front of the medical center over there and line up? Yes? Do you want to prevent smallpox? Don't you say so? Hurry up and get in line. Have you ever had smallpox before? There is none. Then get in line. But I don't have any rice or cotton cloth to pay the bill. The official responded immediately to the head of the household. It's free. Is this true? Yes, you bastard. How dare you doubt the EMI? In response to the official scolding, the head of the family bowed down with his head touching the ground and gestured to his family. No. Stand in line. Hurry. Following the orders of the head of the household, the family members lined up, divided into men and women. Have you ever had smallpox before? There is none. What about the other family members? None of us have ever had smallpox. Right. Then take off your jacket. That's how the vaccination proceeded. The men took off their jackets in the yard, and the women behind a folding screen on one side, and had their shoulders inoculated with cowpox. The official standing next to him opened a tablet and recorded personal information. By the king's order, I will receive an acupuncture treatment that can prevent smallpox. It's free too. As the rumor about the cowpox vaccination spread, there was a great commotion in Joseon. When are you coming to my house? I told you to prepare in advance because your fever will rise and your shoulders will get blisters for the next 5 to 10 days, right? Don't pop the blisters. In houses where there were no people suffering from smallpox, adults were standing outside the door waiting for medical staff to arrive at any time, while houses where people had already been vaccinated were moving around to prepare cold water and clean towels. Thank you for your hard work. No, there's nothing special about what I've prepared, but please at least eat for a while and go. Those who visited the homes of noblemen or wealthy people received generous treatment after being vaccinated. As well-prepared food and drinks were served, those who were served smiled and enjoyed the meal. Now, take a drink. When the owner of the house held out a glass of wine, the official in charge of leading the place politely bowed and opened his mouth. Thank you for your kindness, but I am currently carrying out official duties, so I cannot drink alcohol. It was not only the wealthy who served alcohol and food to medical staff. Even in a neighborhood where many poor people gathered, grain and food were collected and served to medical staff on a regular basis. You guys won't have anything to eat. Will you be okay? If you don't have enough to eat, you can eat sparingly, but isn't that what smallpox is? It's a cheap price to pay for your life. The official sighed after hearing the people's answers. Most of the young officials who had just entered the civil service were heartbroken by the people's words and pounded their hearts. This is it. What is wrong with the Crown Prince's words? Not all residents of Joseon welcomed cowpox vaccination. A considerable number of lawmakers jointly filed an appeal. If we look at examples from ancient times, there has never been a case where human illness and animal illness were the same. So, what is this strange method of treating smallpox in humans using cow pus? How is this any different from bringing in a shaman who believes in a god with great power and performing a ritual? 8. King Sejong, who became angry while reading the appeal, suddenly threw the appeal and shouted at the ministers. Do these guys know what they're talking about? A doctor's main job is to save people's lives and keep them disease-free. To achieve this, doctors are those who must constantly study diseases, practice new techniques, find medicinal ingredients, and devise prescriptions. See monster? A shaman who believes in a god with superpowers. Can these people really be called lawmakers? Merchant ship? Tell Joseon Bupanyan immediately and tell him to arrest these bastards. Yeah. By order of the enraged King Sejong, all the lawmakers who filed appeals for life extension had to be imprisoned. It's unfair. It's unfair. The imprisoned lawmakers complained of injustice, but King Sejong did not forgive them. Punish all criminals 20 lashes. All of the lawmakers who appealed for life extension under King Sejong's order could only be released after receiving 20 lashes each. While the commotion was going on, cowpox vaccination and household surveys for residents of Joseon were completed. After adding them all up, it was confirmed that there were a total of 103,328 people living inside the 4 main gates of the capital, including the common people and the common people. Good job. While King Sejong was praising the king after receiving the reports from Pansio E and Hojo, Do Sungji came in with a tray full of appeals. The crown prince has been quiet for the past few days. What kind of complaint is this again? The appeal is not about lowering the tax base, but about cowpox vaccination. We are receiving appeals requesting that they be vaccinated against cowpox in their villages as well. Okay. At Do Sungji's words, King Sejong quickly untied the string that bound the scroll. King Sejong sighed involuntarily as he read the contents of the appeal. Hudda. The content of the appeals written by officials and lawmakers from various regions of Joseon's 8 provinces was heartbreaking. Protecting the people from smallpox must be done quickly. There are already several successful cases, so there is no reason to experiment again. This just wastes time. It is a matter of giving hope to the people, even if it is only a thin thread, so it must proceed without delay. If it is because there is a shortage of cows, I will use my wealth to rescue all the cows within 100 miles in all directions and compensate them. There is no wealth more precious than a human life. Ministers should also read it. Yes. According to King Sejong's order, the ministers took turns reading the appeals. What do you think I should do? It was a question with a clear answer, but no minister answered right away. Even Judges Lee Jo and Judge Hojo, who were known to be pro-crown princes, only paid attention. Sejong was angry, but he could understand. The number of appeals submitted was only a small portion compared to the number of nobles residing throughout the 8 provinces of Joseon. Considering the cost of vaccination and the tasks to be performed at the same time, it was certain that there would be significant resistance. And such resistance could lead to resistance to the royal authority, and it was highly likely that it would lead to the impeachment of the ministers as scapegoats. Caesar, King Sejong, who was about to sing, immediately stopped speaking. If it were Hyang's personality, he would do whatever it takes and would immediately go ahead and implement nationwide vaccination. However, if resistance to cowpox vaccination turned into a political movement, it could be a huge stain on the township. In the end, King Sejong had no choice but to take a step back. Let's take some more time to think about this. Yes, Your Highness. It was an uncomfortable conclusion for both King Sejong and his subjects. When King Sejong and his subjects were contemplating a clear answer regarding the nationwide implementation of cowpox vaccination, there were people talking cautiously at the large platform in Unjong-jie. So, what about Crown Prince? He filed an appeal insisting on immediate implementation, but it is said that it was not accepted. You must be very heartbroken. I heard that you are writing appeals every day. Hudda. The old man who was sitting at the head of the table and listening to the report sighed and fell into thought. After much deliberation, the old man finally made a decision. I guess I need to save some money. 10 days later, Du Sung-ji, Do Chung-jer, reported to King Sejong. Majesty, the head of the Song-shang dynasty presented 30 pairs of oxen as a gift. 30 pairs of cows? Why? In response to King Sejong's question, Du Sung-ji reported the reason. It is said that the truth was revealed in the hope that it would be of some help in the vaccination against cowpox carried out by the country. King Sejong's face brightened upon hearing Du Sung-ji's report. Is it? I need to meet Gwain in person. Majesty, it would be detrimental to your Majesty's dignity to come face to face with a lowly merchant. The ambassador tried to dissuade him, but King Sejong snorted and stood up. Joy, that lowly merchant gave away 30 pairs of cattle that even his ministers would not give away. Ask yourself who really harmed your dignity. The ambassadors fell silent due to King Sejong's criticism, and King Sejong went to Junjiangjan under the guidance of merchant ships and monks. In the large yard in front of Junjiangjan, merchants were standing in a row. Please, Your Majesty, please da. The merchants gathered at the merchant ship's deck all prostrated themselves on the floor and bowed deeply. Stand up. In response to King Sejong's order to sit down on the chairs brought by the eunuchs, the merchants stood up politely and stood with their hands folded. So, you offered a cow as a treat? Yes, I heard a rumor that His Majesty the Lord needed a cow to be used to vaccinate against cowpox, so I decided to find out the truth. If there were 30 pairs of cows, it would have taken quite a bit of wealth. How did you come up with such an idea? Accumulating wealth is of no use if there are no people, and if the people are not at peace, there is no way to travel. In response to Daebang's reply, Sejong hit his knee. This is a wise answer to a foolish question. King Sejong, impressed by Daebang's answer, glanced at the ministers who followed him and muttered as if to make them listen. If the people are not at peace, they cannot travel upward. Isn't he much better than those who sit in their comfort zone and just talk? Da. The ministers had no choice but to remain silent in response to King Sejong's retort. After giving a blow to the ministers, King Sejong asked a question to the merchants standing in the yard. Okay, did you give the cow to be used for cowpox vaccination? Yes, Your Highness. There are 30 pairs of male and female cows, and they are just full-grown cows. Lastly, there are those who have never had cowpox. Hee. How meticulous. Indeed. A 30-year-old couple who has not had cowpox would be a huge help. You have given so much help to the country, But is there anything you wish for? Do you want a government position? Or do you want something else? Daebang bowed his head and answered King Sejong's question. How could a lowly, petty businessman want a government position? Also, how could you want a reward when you just did what you could as a citizen of Joseon? If you just have a wish, all of our family members live in Joseon. Therefore, when expanding vaccination against cowpox, I would like you to start in Joseon. Daebang paused for a moment, looked at the looks of King Sejong and the ministers, and then continued speaking. It's just a small wish from a lowly person who only knows how to do business. There is a lot of talk about cowpox vaccination as to its effectiveness. By the way, are you sure that Wudu will listen? Is there anyone who is a father with children who does not want their children to be healthy? Is there any need to doubt it since it has been decided by His Majesty the Wise Lord? King Sejong burst out laughing at Daebang's answer. Haha, good night. I will order you to start with my personality. In response to King Sejong's confirmation, the merchants immediately bowed down on the ground and shouted loudly, I am devastated. I am devastated. As the merchants were shouting out words of gratitude, Kiang, who had heard the news, entered the yard. Crown, are you here? Yes. Sejong raised his hand and pointed to the merchants. Aren't they truly noble people? That's right. Abama Mama. I'd like to say thank you to them, can I? Kihi. I am devastated. After receiving permission from King Sejong, Kiang went down the stairs and walked in front of the merchants. As the incense approached, the merchants bowed in unison. See you, Crown Prince. Nice to meet you. It was funny to see a child speaking politely like an adult, but the nervous merchants were in no condition to notice it. Kiang walked close to the merchants and held Daebang's hand. Thank you very much. Oh my, how dare you hold the hand of such a lowly merchant? Such brilliance. It's the hands of those who do their best to do their work, so what's the problem? Rather, they are truly precious hands. Daebang was truly moved by Hyang's words and bowed his back. Gwangyang, Guangrong. Gwangyang is coming. Neither Abama nor I will say anything about your hard work. I won't look down on it as a business. However, I would like to ask you one thing. Please walk the right path. As long as you do not cause suffering to other people in the hope of making a fortune, you will not be persecuted for engaging in business. Daebang responded to Hyang's request with a loud voice. I will carry out my heart and mind. After meeting the king and crown prince and leaving the palace, Song Sang's grand chamberlain looked back at the palace with a happy face. A sate has been born. Seonggun. That's two people. It is indeed so. I have often heard that His Majesty the Lord is extraordinary, but Crown Prince Mama is also extraordinary. It was a short meeting, but he was definitely not a normal person. I thought he was just a strange person, having only heard the words and rumors of those who participated in the competition. The merchants who accompanied Daebang's words all added one word at a time. Daebang, who had been nodding at the merchant's words, turned his body. It may be a little bit, but let's hope. If the owner of the palace had that kind of character, he would be able to sail the 4 seas like our ancestors did in the past. Yes, Daebang adult. Daebang, who was walking down the street with a happy face, suddenly became fierce. When I think about it, the crown prince looks like that, but why is my grandson like that? There's a fire burning inside. As Daebang grumbled, remembering his mischievous grandson, someone muttered quietly behind him. It's because the seeds are different, sure. The rumor that Song Sang released his wealth and presented a cow to the king spread quickly. As expected, it's Song Sang. I don't think anyone would do business. You may call it a gimmick, but look at the results. They say they start from Joseon and get vaccinated against cowpox. As people talked about rumors, the topics of the village they lived in and the people of the surrounding villages came up as topics. It's not just Song Sang-do. Did you hear the rumor about the Jinsa River in Gamgal beyond the mountain behind that? Why Gamgal's River Jinsa? It is said that they rescued 5 pairs of cows that did not suffer from cowpox and went on the road to the truth. Okay. Jinsakong is not the only one like that. I heard that Singwon Choi in Naragal is also busy looking for cows. The farmer who heard the story swore, "Oh my gosh. What is the gentleman in our neighborhood doing that is so quiet? I guess you're busy pounding the buttocks of the bitch you brought in the fall of the year before last." Chato. He doesn't move when he is gaining wealth, but is only busy when he is filling his belly. You're a nobleman who spends his wealth only to buy silk to cover his concubine's buttocks. We too are very blessed. As the rumors spread, the relationship between local officials and the people gradually widened. Of course, Those who took the initiative to save cows by investing their wealth and wrote an appeal calling for nationwide implementation of cowpox vaccination received absolute support from the people of the same town. However, such figures did not exceed 30% nationwide. King Sejong, who received reports from Sangso and other observers, glared at the ministers. What did you say before? Isn't it right for the country to get involved in even the small affairs of local villages? Family blind fishermen? The anti-crown ministers, including Yeo Uijong, had to bow their heads in response to King Sejong's reprimand. I am devastated. I am devastated. The ministers bowed their heads and asked for forgiveness, but King Sejong waved his hands without hiding his anger. Okay, let's prepare for nationwide implementation of cowpox vaccination. I am devastated, but the finances are not good enough to implement it nationwide. For the financial issue, didn't you decide to collect a lot of money from the local magnates? The utility of cowdew is not yet clear, but if you charge a high price, there will be opposition from noblemen. Shut your damn snout right now. King Sejong exploded at the sight of Yang Wijing continuing to oppose. The inside of the main hall froze as the words came out in slang rather than plain language. King Sejong searched through the appeals and reports placed on the West Bank. Sejong, holding the report he had pulled out in that way, threw it at the Yang Wijing. The front and back are the same. I only heard about the two sides, but the two sides were right in front of my eyes. Do you know what that report is? This is about the cowpox vaccination carried out in Joseon. There is not a single one of your ministers who has not been vaccinated against cowpox. Not a single one. If you have a mouth, make an excuse. Shouldn't they step forward and vaccinate their family members, and then implement it nationwide since they don't know the effectiveness? You two-faced false princes. Okay, I don't even want to look at it. This issue will be dealt with directly by the governor himself, so don't even open your mouth. Financial problems? If we don't have enough wealth, we will expand it by using the gifts and wealth of your high-ranking monks and bastards. You guys, once you get those great gifts a few times, it's all over. Get out now. In response to King Sejong's exclaiming, all the ministers, starting with Yang Wijing, banged their heads on the floor and shouted, Please kill me. Majesty, please kill me. Get out now. Majesty. 8. I'd rather go out. Sejong, unable to control his anger, stormed out. Majesty. Majesty. Although the ministers sang in unison, King Sejong left the main hall without even looking back. The ministers remaining in the Jeonjin all fired arrows of criticism at Yang Wijing. There are so many Yang Wijing. Why can't you tell what to say and what not to say? Have you become senile? Da. In the face of heavy fire from the ministers, Yang Wijing only closed his eyes and remained silent. However, only his red-faced face and trembling beard represented his emotions. Leaving behind such a resolution, the ministers searched for a solution. What should I do now? To the question of Judge Lee Jo, who was pro-crown, Judge Hojo answered gruffly. What to do? Is there an answer other than the grave sin of plaster? After we commit the major sin, we must create a nationwide implementation plan. That would be best. Judge Hojo glared at Yang Wijing and told him to listen. My knees are already sore, so you're committing the grave sin of plaster. That too in the harsh winter. Is there a thought or not? Let's go. Let's do that. With Pansio Hojo leading the way, the pro-crown ministers left Yururu Jeonjin. The ministers of the anti-crown faction, who were only paying attention, soon followed them and left the Jeonjin, and soon only the Yang Wijing, the civil servants, and the Joseon were left in the Jeonjin. Yang Wijing, who was left alone with his eyes closed, let out a long sigh. Whoa, I've lived too long. I've lived too long. The commotion that occurred at Jeonjin immediately reached Yang's ears. So, where did Abama go? His Majesty the Lord has been looking for a heavy warrior. Okay, good job. Yes, Mama. After sending out the inner tube, Yang sighed softly. Whoa, have the ministers of Jeonjin lost their ability to learn? If you've been through something like that for a while, you would know how to avoid it now. Or are you still fighting? The question of Yang was that the pro-crown ministers were doing the same thing. Thank you. Thank you. Judge Hojo, who was preparing a scaffold for the grave crime of gypsum, turned his head to Judge Lee Jo's urgent cries. What's going on, Captain? In response to Judge Hojo's question, Judge Lee took a deep breath and opened his mouth. The Inspector General is writing a letter of appeal saying that it is not right for the Chief Minister to practice martial arts. What? At Judge Lee Jo's words, Judge Hojo was so shocked that he got up from his seat. Is this gentleman truly possessed by a ghost? When the ministers who heard the news stormed into Wajangbu, Yang Wijing had just finished drafting the appeal. Great. Appeal? What nonsense. How sane is it to appeal in a situation where the grave crime of plaster is not enough? Although the gathered ministers lined up to criticize him, Yang Wijing's expression was calm. This is an appeal that must be filed. If we think about the future of Joseon, not just the present, we must consider this matter and make the Lord Sang agree. Thank you. Surely, a ghost has appeared. When Judge Hojo shouted, Yang Joseon also raised his voice. You have forgotten how important it is to run state affairs. I even forgot why I have subjects. Great. Other ministers tried to stop him, but Yang Wijing, holding the appeal in his hand, entered the Sungjiangwen and presented the appeal. It's an appeal. Please present it to the chief minister. All right. Seeing the monks' shocked expressions and voices, Yang Wijing added, Don't make those faces. This is all for the future of Joseon and the Lord. Du Sungji, with a stiff expression on his face, was handed the petition. I will present this to His Majesty the Prime Minister. Here comes the appeal from the Yang Wijing. Leave it and go. From Du Sungji, via merchant ship, Yang Wijing's appeal was placed on King Sejong's books. King Sejong, who was staring at the scroll of appeal in silence, opened the scroll of appeal and began to read. Sashin, Yang Wijing Ryu Zhonghayan. I am raising money and submitting an appeal to His Majesty the Lord. After all, state affairs are. The contents of the appeal written by Ryu Zhonghayan were as follows. Government literally means running the country. Therefore, deciding and implementing a policy lightly is something that should never be done. It is a fact that even Samchik Dongja, Fan Shritonzi, knows that what must be avoided when deciding and executing a policy is Josemosa, Dalfan Mu Thur, and Jobian Siaki, Dalban Shigai. This is because it is a matter of people's trust in the state and its policies. However, looking at the issue of nationwide implementation of cowpox vaccination, the government was exercising authority through a unilateral decision by the chief minister. This is not right. First, vaccinate residents living in Joseon. The first plan decided was to implement it nationwide after confirming its effectiveness, and this was something that the prime minister also agreed to. However, a small number of people filed an appeal demanding rapid nationwide expansion and overturned the initial plan simply by presenting the lawsuit. So, is this not a legal action? The chief minister criticized the majority of Sarim, Sirlean, for only offering cows to a small number of nobles and merchants, but this is not correct. The efficacy of cowpox vaccination has not yet been proven. Therefore, most people wait until the utility is confirmed. Of course, there are some who refuse the duties of the nobleman due to their own greed, but they are only a small portion. This is because those who are familiar with the scriptures follow the words of sages, and no shame and morality are the noblemen. Running a country, in other words, making and implementing policies should be accomplished only through consultation between the monarch and subjects. Why are subjects needed to run a country? This is because it is not easy for a monarch to see and judge widely on his own. Only when the monarch and his subjects examine various aspects and come together to make a decision will policy move in the right direction. If everything in state affairs were decided and carried out at the discretion of the monarch, what need would there be for a place called the court, and what would there be for the subjects? All that is needed is eunuchs to take charge of the receipt and disbursement of documents. Of course, this is not the royal way, nor is it a paternal way. It is merely a dictatorship. In addition, it is for the sake of the future of the nation that it is not right for the monarch to exercise authority to become a routine practice. I have no doubt that the Lord of Dangium will not deviate from the right path, as he has the qualities of a dragon among people. Also, the Crown Prince also has excellent qualifications, so I am less worried. But what will he do after that? If a tyrant like Jialju, Jiado, ascends to the throne and exercises authority as he pleases because of custom, what will be the fate of Joseon? In order to prevent such a situation, consultations between the military and ministers must be observed, and policies decided through such consultations must be carefully prepared and implemented. It has only been about 30 years since our Joseon dynasty was founded. If we compare it to a house, we are just getting started. Consolidating the consistency of military mythology and policy implementation is the only way to avoid the ideological trap and promise endless prosperity for Joseon. The reason why Jianzhou headed down the path to ruin was because he neglected this. To conclude, the nationwide implementation of cowpox vaccination through Guangdong should be stopped. As initially decided, we must first confirm its effectiveness and then decide whether to implement it nationwide. If it is actually useful, God, Ryu Zhonghayan, I will gladly give away all my assets. After reading the Yang appeal to the end, King Sejong put down the appeal and gritted his teeth. What a cunning man. Sejong, holding on tightly to Seoin with both hands and suppressing his boiling anger, gave an order to the merchant ship. What are those proud ministers doing now? I am currently committing the grave sin of plaster in front of Junjiamjin. Tell them to come into the blackout right now. Every single one of you. I follow your orders. The ministers, who had received orders via merchant ships, quickly entered the truce. When the ministers, starting with the Yang, sat down, King Sejong handed over the appeal in question to the merchant marine. Read it loudly so that all ministers can hear. Yes. At King Sejong's command, the merchants read the Yang appeal aloud. As the story progressed, the faces of the ministers, who had been stiff from the beginning, became even harder. Although it was written in polite words, it was criticizing King Sejong's decision-making as dictatorial. He said he would gladly share the last sentence, but in reality, it could have been interpreted to mean the exact opposite. I was told to take cowpox, but is it really effective? If you have it, I'll give you all my money. After finishing reading, the merchant quietly folded the scroll and placed it on King Sejong's books. Meanwhile, the power outage was as quiet as ever. The officer and Joseon also stopped using their golden pens and were only swallowing their saliva. It was Sejong who broke the silence. When he first learned about cowpox, he immediately thought of a nationwide implementation. However, Wu Yuizhong said that it was too hasty, and Gwaine also accepted what he said, thinking it made sense. I will ask the gentleman, what kind of advice did Gwaine use? Before and after that, did Gwaine always give advice? He discussed all matters with the officers and chose the plan that everyone thought was right. Is this also an exercise in authority? The person called Yang considers exercising authority as a sin, but authority is also one of the ruling tools of the monarch. When running a country, there are situations that require quick decisions. However, if you are in a situation where you need to make a decision quickly, but you are in a sluggish state, you will eventually have no choice but to resort to authority. Isn't a monarch who loses time while waiting for his subjects to come to a conclusion a truly incompetent monarch? Whose responsibility is it to create a custom where Guando becomes a part of everyday life? Are you a monarch or a subject? As King Sejong continued to reprimand, the heads of the ministers sank more and more to the floor. The more you read Yang appeal, the more cunning it becomes. The sentences are beautiful, but they are full of stench. Most of the Saram, Sirlane, are people who know shame and morality. Then, why do we reward noblemen who open their treasures and provide relief to the people when there is a drought? If you follow the path of the sage and know shame and duty, isn't it a natural thing to help the people? But since that wasn't the case, wasn't the reward meant to encourage others to follow suit? Why is the reality different from what Yang said? Yang, answer me. At King Sejong's command, Yang bowed his head. I am devastated. What are the noblemen who, whenever there is a smallpox or a plague, use their wealth to find medicinal herbs to cure their neighbors, and at the very least, call shamans and perform exorcisms in order to pray for the power of a supernatural god? What is it about the noblemen who spend their wealth to buy cows and offer them as gifts like this time? Are they acting hastily because they have shallow discipline? I am devastated. However, in the case of cowpox, its effectiveness has not been clearly proven. What are the shepherds of Nubial Island? For generations, we got cowpox and avoided smallpox. Wasn't this proof enough? I'll say it again. The shepherds alone are too few. This, Sejong, who had been clutching the inkstone placed in the West Bank, relaxed his hands. Good night. Then let me ask you one question. What should you do if smallpox occurs in Gangwon-do instead of Hanseong? Should we wait until it spreads from Gangwon-do to Hanseong? Does it matter if many people die, or turn into idiots, or pups in the meantime? Even though there is a plan to prevent smallpox, is it worth the sacrifice of not getting vaccinated because it is not sufficiently proven, or of giving up the law and only following the will of the military? It is heartbreaking to make sacrifices, but solidifying the laws of national management is more valuable. Although I pity the people who suffer from smallpox, victims of smallpox have been around for a long time. I think we can endure that level of sacrifice in order to get Joseon's laws right from the start. In response to the Yang, lamentations broke out among the ministers. Even in the eyes of the ministers, Yang answer was stubborn. King Sejong gritted his teeth at Yang Wijing's answer. Good night. Its effectiveness must be proven. From today, when there is a report that smallpox has occurred anywhere in the 8 provinces of Joseon, everyone, starting with Gwaine, everyone in the palace, and all 103,328 residents of Hanseon will be moved to the outbreak site. We will investigate those who contract smallpox among those who were moved to check whether it is effective or not. All the ministers rose up in response to King Sejong's explosive remarks. Majesty, please inform me. Please inform me. This is impossible. Moving 100,000 people is an impossible task. All of the subjects opposed King Sejong's decision. However, King Sejong's intentions were firm. Shut up. If you have your way, you will have to wait until smallpox originating somewhere other than Hanseong spreads to Hanseong, or until smallpox occurs in Hanseong. Then, who will bear the outcry of the people who were sacrificed in the meantime? And moving 100,000 people is impossible? Then how did the military move? This is just an excuse. After pausing for a moment to catch his breath, King Sejong concluded by glaring at Yang Wijing. This is to solidify the law to protect the harmony between the king and the gods, so I will not accept any objections, and listen to the spirit. If its effectiveness is confirmed, I will firmly hold my lord responsible for the crime. After finishing speaking, Sejong stormed out. The officer recorded all of this without exception. The Yang Wijing's appeal was like adding fuel to the fire and made the situation even worse. The officer who finished recording continued immediately. The officer says, in implementing royal politics, the harmony between the military and the gods is essential. However, republicanism is only a tool and not a goal. Today's appeal and remarks by the young Uijong can be said to be a reversal of the original point. It is heartbreaking to see the fall of the famous old man. Kiang clicked her tongue when she heard about the conflict between King Sejong and the minister. It's completely become a chicken race. They say politics is a cause, but isn't this going too far? Kiang, who had been clicking his tongue at the situation in which the government was heading to the end, suddenly became stern. If this continues, isn't there going to be an unprecedented rebellion in history? With a serious expression on his face, Kiang folded his arms and was lost in thought. After doing the calculations in her head for a while, she came to her conclusion. Just in case, I guess I'll have to start preparing soon. That night, King Sejong visited Hyang's room. Caesar, you probably heard what happened today, right? Yes. Do you also think this father's behavior was excessive? I am just frustrated by the old-fashionedness of Yang Wijing. I think the cause is important, but the practical benefits are also important. In response to Hyang's answer, Sejong smiled and patted Hyang's shoulder. Seiya, I feel confident because of you. That's too much praise. Woda. Sejong let out a long sigh and complained. With things happening like this, I'd rather have smallpox break out somewhere nearby. You will definitely get good results. 5 days later, an urgent report was sent to the royal court. I have smallpox. Where is it? This is the Yangdongpo area of Jumchingan. King Sejong and the ministers who heard about the outbreak area looked relieved. This was because both King Sejong and the ministers were exhausted from the stress brought on by the situation, which felt like walking on thin ice. It worked out better. It went well. As soon as it was reported that smallpox had occurred in Jumcheon, right next to Hanseong, the government moved quickly. Prohibit river crossings at ports other than Mapo Ferry and Noryangjin. Yes, Your Highness. Mobilize the soldiers of the 12th Company that defends Hanseong and prevent them from entering Jumchingan from other provinces. The area accessible to Jumchingan must be limited to Hanseong. Yes, Your Highness. According to King Sejong's orders, the soldiers defending Hanseong blocked the main entrance to Jumchingan. It wasn't just land that was blocked. Not only the Han River, but also the major rivers and ports around it blocked the entry and exit of ships. The only people allowed to enter were soldiers and officials who had been vaccinated against cowpox. King Sejong gave them an order. It is certain that food shortages will occur in Hanseong and Jumchingan due to blocking transportation routes. I issued a special order. Soldiers and officials are to manage the supply of rice from the rice granary built in Bupyeong Dohobu. Yes, Your Highness. Rice Market in Bupyeong was a newly created place not long ago. According to the order of King Sejong, who accepted Hyang's suggestion, Hojo imported a large amount of grain from the Ming dynasty. However, the quantity was much larger than expected. It is said that in the fall of the previous year, there was a great storm in Gangnam. As a result, the price of grain fell a lot, so we were able to purchase more than expected. King Sejong made an ambiguous expression at Hojo Panseo's explanation. Should I say I'm fortunate or envious? I have such ambiguous feelings. God felt the same way. Anyway, I'm glad that the amount of grain obtained through the envoys of Dongji, Dongzhi, and Jiangzhou, Jiangjosa, Zhengchao, New Year's emissary, is enough to survive the spring hunger period, Chuncheongqi. It's all thanks to your insight. King Sejong smiled shyly at the compliment from Panseo Hojo. What about insight? It's because the crown prince is smart. As Sejong spoke, Jiang, who was sitting next to him, expressed humility. Is what the little one did in vain? It is said that a bead must be 3 pieces long to be considered a treasure. How would this have been possible if Abimama had not decided? Your Majesty, the Crown Prince's words are truly correct. No sooner had Hyang finished speaking than the ministers of the 6 dynasties answered in unison. While the ministers and Hyangs of the 6 dynasties were raising their voices to honor King Sejong's virtue, the monks, Daesagan, and Desahian were only paying lip service. After the recent clash between the king and the royal court, the monks, the Daesagan, and the Desahian were clearly pushed out of the mainstream. As it was clearly visible that they had been pushed out, the ministers of the 6 dynasties who had been with them, most notably Panseo Yejo, moved to the Crown Prince faction in large numbers. As a result, it ended up looking like it does today. King Sejong briefly raised his hand to stop the ministers' compliments and settle the situation. Soldiers were deployed to prevent people from entering Jumchingan and Hanseong from other regions, and the problem of food shortage was also solved through the rice granary in Bupyeong Dohobu. What remains is the medical issue. How is it going with this ruling? Judge Li Zhou bowed his head and answered King Sejong's question immediately. We are preparing to select members of the Nuiwan, medical women, and members of Haiminguk, Jezingwan, and Domseo Daebuan and dispatch them to Jumchingan. Complete preparations as quickly as possible so that we can treat the sick people. Also, although smallpox is circulating in Jumchingan, there are people who have not yet suffered from smallpox, so why not inoculate them with cowpox? You have excellent insight. We will prepare to make it happen. Good luck. Sejong, who was nodding his head in response to Judge Li Zhou's answer, looked back. Do you have anything to add? Why not go to Jumchingan from among the people living in Hanseong and recruit people to help the doctors and medical women? Among the people living in Jumchingan, the family of a patient with smallpox must take care of the patient and must also be quarantined because they may have contracted smallpox. And doctors will be busy just treating patients. However, mobilizing people who do not have smallpox can actually cause smallpox to spread further. Therefore, among the people residing in Hanseong, people who will work for a daily wage are sought and sent to Jumchingan. Those sent in this way will assist doctors and medical women in their work and prepare food for patients and their families. And then, the residents of Hanseong can also get smallpox? When Wu Yuizhong, who had been sitting quietly, walked up to him, Jiang snorted softly and answered, Have you forgotten? All the residents of Hanseong were vaccinated with cowpox. Wudu is filial piety. Wu Yuizhong, who was about to refute Jiang's words, quickly stopped. The sin hit me right away at that sight. I understand what you want to say, but I have no doubt in the effectiveness of cowpeas. Jiang, who covered Wu Yuizhong's mouth, gave a mantra to King Sejong. Abimama, I am petitioning you as a subject of Abimama. If the people of Hanseong hesitate, send Soja. Soja, I will take the lead in treating sick people. The officer who was recording Hyang's words muttered softly. Also Iikta. Officers were not the only ones who had similar reactions. Not only the ministers, but even King Sejong showed similar reactions. Sejong, who was glaring at the scent, came to a conclusion, issuing a proclamation to the people of Hanseong to save workers. I follow your orders. How much do you think the daily wage should be appropriate? In response to King Sejong's question, Judge Hojo searched his memory for a moment and answered. According to the last survey, the average number of people living in Hanseong in their first household was 5. With this in mind, since it is going to be a tough job, I think 5 hops a day would be appropriate. Sejong, who had been calculating while stroking his beard, nodded in response to Judge Hojo's answer. 5 hops. Then let's give that much as the daily wage and gather people. I follow your orders. As soon as King Sejong's order was given, the government moved quickly. The balance of power was completely in the hands of King Sejong, and this was due to the danger of an infectious disease called smallpox. Soldiers who received orders began blocking the roads leading to Jumchingan and Hanseong. People who were blocked from entering Hanseong from the provinces protested fiercely, but they immediately turned away at a word from the soldiers. I have smallpox going around. Beg money. It wasn't just land that was blocked. Not only the Han River, but also the ferry ports of surrounding rivers, such as the Imjin River, were blocked. The government, which prevented the spread of smallpox in Jungcheongun, began full-scale treatment. Near Yeongdeungpo, a considerable number of people entered the village. Is this here? That's right. In response to the local magistrate's response, an official of the Joseon dynasty, led by lawmakers and medical women, gave orders to the soldiers. Put up a tent next to the well over there for the doctors and medical women, and set up a tent to accommodate the patients at a distance from the well, and as soon as the tent is set up, gather the patients and bring them in. Yes. Soldiers who followed orders from the government began erecting large tents next to the well and in the open space. Once the tents were set up, the soldiers began unloading the beds from the carts and moving them into the tents. Soon, beds were prepared for the patients to lie down on. While the soldiers were busy moving tents and other equipment, doctors and medical women began preparing for treatment. Please search all the surrounding houses and bring in all the patients. Yes, old man Jubu. And prepare the herbal medicines to brew. The most needed one is sashihotang, which is needed to relieve fever, so brew that first. Yes, housewife. The fight against smallpox that took place throughout Jungcheongun was compiled into daily reports and submitted to the government. Sejong and his ministers checked the progress with serious faces every time a report was posted. After about 15 days, more and more hopeful reports began to come in from Jungcheongun. The number of confirmed cases of smallpox has not increased for 3 days. Oh. Yes. Upon hearing Judge Lee Jo's report, King Sejong clenched his fists, and the ministers let out exclamations. Judge Lee Jo continued to report. Only 5 people who received cowpox vaccination 10 days ago developed smallpox, and it was confirmed that they already had smallpox before receiving cowpox. Is it? Then what about those who came down from Hanseong? Not a single person has contracted smallpox. Woda. In response to Judge Lee Jo's answer, King Sejong let out a long sigh and leaned back on the backrest of his throne. While King Sejong, who was leaning back, had a bright smile on his face. Yang Wijing's face was completely black and dying. Seeing Yang Wijing's face like that, King Sejong looked back at Judge Lee Jo. When can we confirm that smallpox has completely disappeared from Jungcheongun? The last patient was 3 days ago, so it must be at least 15 days. Then will the lawmakers and medical women dispatched to Jungcheongun stay there until then? Judge Lee Jo answered King Sejong's question right away. No, as the number of patients is gradually decreasing, we plan to withdraw about half of them in 5 days. Is it? King Sejong stroked his beard and thought for a moment in response to Judge Lee Jo's answer, then gave an order. Please order the doctors and medical women who went on a business trip to treat smallpox to be given 5 days of vacation when they return, and to prepare for nationwide implementation of cowpox vaccination as soon as the vacation is over. I follow your orders. Also, make sure that the lawmakers, medical women, government officials, and soldiers who participated in this work are rewarded according to their rank, up to the words they said on an island. I worked hard for my country and people, so shouldn't I be rewarded? Yes. The minister's eyes widened at King Sejong's unconventional order. Just then, King intervened without wasting time. This is truly the right decision. There is nothing more unfair than saying that since you have received the blessings of the country, it is natural for you to do so. It is an emergency, not an ordinary matter, so it is only natural that we should reward it. Loyalty and filial piety should not be subject to trade. Yang Wijing screamed at Hyang's words. As a result, Kang's voice grew louder. In order for loyalty and filial piety to not be subject to trade, there must be even more trust and compensation. The belief that the country will take care of me and my family even if I die or become an invalid. I have faith that my parents will not abandon me no matter how difficult it is. There are many parents who take for granted even if they die or get injured on the battlefield, and who abandon their children when the harvest is poor. Who will protect loyalty and filial piety? Taejun became quiet at Hyang's words. Kang continued speaking loudly. I'll say it again. If you don't have this kind of faith, who can be faithful and filial? Rather, it is right to practice the kindness of removing boils. If we take for granted things that should not be taken for granted, the country and society will be ruined. Reflect on the history of the Central Plains and the history of our thaw. The ministers remained silent in response to Hyang's words. I wanted to offer a counter-argument, but there was no suitable counter-argument. Since the founding of Joseon, there have been several severe crop failures. At that time, orphans abounded, and there were many desperate reports reporting this. The same was true for the military. Even when troops were drafted, there were many who avoided military service by committing self-inflicted harm or who ran away and became refugees. In the end, Sejong came to a conclusion. It is true that loyalty and filial piety are basic attitudes that people should have. However, it is also essential for the nation and parents to have the right mindset when dealing with their people and children. I think it would be better to follow the original plan in rewarding those who were responsible for dealing with the smallpox outbreak in Jumchingun. Is there any opposition? In response to King Sejong's question, all the ministers bowed their heads. I follow your orders. The officer who recorded all of this added at the end, think of faithfulness before loyalty. These words of the crown prince can be seen as an apostle. However, if you look at the reality of the money, you have to think deeply. After finalizing the agenda for the award, King Sejong looked at the young Wijin. King Sejong, sitting on the throne above the danga and looking down at young Wijin, muttered in his heart, that shabby old man. Young Wijin, isn't there anything left for us to do? Young Wijin, who was lowering his head in response to King Sejong's question, closed his eyes tightly. What is to come has come. Young Wijin immediately bowed down on the floor and raised his voice. Shin, Young Wijin Ryu Jiangyan, out of loyalty to the country, stop. King Sejong, who stopped Ryu Zhonghayan from speaking, spoke out what he had decided to say. The Young Wijin has failed to confirm its utility. He blocked the nationwide implementation of cowpox vaccination, saying, establishing laws is a priority. So, what happened? A tragedy occurred in Jumchingun where smallpox broke out. Look at the tragedy that occurred in Jumchingun. So far, 25 people have died, and more than 60 have become idiots, blind, or other disabled people. And what's worse is that we don't know how many more people will die or be maimed in the future. Ministers, think carefully. If the country had been vaccinated against cowpox at the right time, the tragedy in Jumchingun could have been prevented. In order to protect his power, Young Wijin used the name of keeping the law as a shield and caused unnecessary sacrifices. Therefore, I will hold Young Wijin Ryu Zhonghayan responsible for the crime. At King Sejong's ruling, the Young Wijin bowed down and raised his voice. Majesty, God doesn't do this just to protect his power. I told you so because the effectiveness of cow dart has not been clearly proven, and it is unfair to exhort it. Shut up. Are you still trying to mislead the situation with those cunning words? Hello. Call Wigumbu Jinmu, Yi Jinfu, Junfu right now. Majesty. Majesty, please inform me. As soon as King Sejong's order was issued, the high priests, Daesagan, and Daesahian immediately bowed down and stepped forward to stop him. However, King Sejong did not back down. Notification? Do what you are told. Majesty. Young Wijin's words were a bit excessive, but they were all born out of patriotism and loyalty to the country. So please let us know. Has all the patriotic loyalty frozen to death? Your Majesty, please inform me. While the monks and Daesahian tried to stop him, the Daesagan offered his condolences in a sorrowful voice. Your Majesty, although Young Wijin's words were excessive, his patriotic loyalty is like gold. Please don't worry about superficial words and actions, but think about their intentions. Shut your mouth. Words are vessels that contain thoughts, so how can the surface and the mind be different? If the outer skin and the inner core are different, then the front and back are the same. So how can one be called a gentleman? Your Majesty, please inform me. Don't provoke your patience. If you continue to babble, I will think of you as being in the same league as that nobleman. Although King Sejong gave a terrible warning, the officials, ambassadors, and Daesahian did not back down. Please inform me. It is not right to call an innocent person guilty. Please inform me. If the Lord is going down an unrighteous path, how can a subject remain silent? It is unbelievable to hold the Young Wijin guilty. Please inform me. In response to the opposition from the nobles, King Sejong threw down his armrest and became angry. Fiery? Injustice? What injustice? The number of people who lost their lives due to smallpox over the years was literally countless. Also, how many people saved their lives but became idiots or crippled and ended up begging for food? We have found a way to prevent this, so why was there a delay? Also, there were people who destroyed their property and sacrificed their cattle for their neighbors, but who was the one who stopped them for the simple reason that it was a change of scenery? Who was truly unrighteous? Despite King Sejong's cries, the monks, Daesahian, and Daesagan did not back down. I would say again, it is true that Young Wijin's words were excessive in that part. However, when it comes to government affairs, the first thing is that the will of the monarch and the subjects are in agreement. and once it is decided, it must not be moved. The reason why the Lord's Council was against your Majesty's decision is because your Majesty's decision violated the second law. The agreement between the military and the subjects and the weighting of the government's actions are the most basic foundations of royal politics that Seongjin spoke of. As Wu Yuizhong coughed up blood, King Sejong hit the armrest. It is truly the pinnacle of Gakakasi, Chuxia Ursur, Aegean Insu, Watin Yinsoi, and Gyo Yangyang Sik, Chao Yanling Thura. Do you think that you guys followed the will of the saint and blocked Gwain's decision? Aren't you guys just acting for your own petty greed? Such a greedy desire to put down me, the monarch. Didn't you guys want to make a scarecrow out of Gwain by creating an arrangement where the military and the government are strong, rather than an agreement between the military and the government? You guys are even more wicked than Sambong Jongdu-jan. They are the ones I can never forgive. When King Sejong mentioned Jongdu-jan again, the political leaders all came forward to deny it. Majesty, the gods never have such feelings. Majesty, please know the loyalty of the gods. The royal court froze in the war of words between King Sejong and his ministers. The ministers who were watching the war of words with their backs bent seemed to already be smelling the thick smell of blood. Your Majesty, I have passed the Wigumbu Jimu entrance exam. King Sejong could not hide his anger at the merchant's words and immediately listened to the order. Jimu of Wigumbu, listen. Immediately, imprison those high officials, the Yongwijing, the left Yijong, the right Yijong, and Daesehyun and Daesegan, and prepare the provincial officers and provincial governors to carry out the command as soon as it is given. I follow your orders. As soon as King Sejong's order was given, Wigumbu Jianmu called the Jumgun and dragged Yongwijing and his party out. Majesty, please inform me. Majesty, this is against the will of the sage. Majesty, Yongwijing and his party tried to change King Sejong's will until the moment they were dragged away. However, Sejong remained unchanged. Ministers, listen. I will listen to you closely. As soon as King Sejong spoke, the ministers gathered their spirits and answered with one voice. The ministers should use today's events as a lesson to learn and refrain from making reckless moves. I will carry out my heart and mind. The positions of the three monks, Daesegan and Daesehyun, are vacant, so select suitable people and inform the Gwain. I will give you 5 days. I follow your orders. Sejong, who was glaring at the frozen ministers, turned his gaze to Du Sungji. Du Sungji, tell Wigumbu to imprison all the criminals and their families and seal all their assets. I follow your orders. Let's leave it here for today. Go and take a look at things. Starting with the incense given to King Sejong's congratulatory message, all the ministers bowed to King Sejong and left the main hall. Sejong, who was left alone in the blackout, placed his hand on his forehead and let out a long sigh. Hada, King, who returned to the East Palace, summarized the situation with a serious expression on his face. If this had been a TV drama, the ratings would have shot up instantly. The actors who had to memorize the lines must have been dying. Is that why traditional historical dramas were pushed out and fusion historical dramas emerged? King, who had been muttering to herself without realizing it, shook her head. Shit, should I also follow Mr. Sanchiampo? Why are you taking a side street? After completing self-reflection, Gang summarized the situation again. No one will make a fuss about today's incident for a while. The problem is to fill the void. Will Huang He and Meng Sasong finally make a sortie? Sejong's formation of the Avengers? Your Majesty, please come. Kang got up from his chair at the notification from the eunuch, standing outside the door. Kang, who had just put on her clothes, immediately bowed her head as soon as King Sejong entered. Abima, are you here? So, what were you doing? I was reflecting on what happened today. Okay, I see, let's sit down first. Yes. The two father and son sat on chairs with a table between them. Would you like me to lift the car? Okay, let's have a drink. But they won't serve Ryup tea here either, right? No, at Sejong's words. Kiang smiled bitterly and shook her head. The lupica mentioned by King Sejong was made from well-dried willow bark. The biggest problem with our King Sejong's disease-free longevity is diabetes and vascular disease, Kiang, who was looking for various ways to ensure King Sejong's long and healthy life, remembered Teacher Sanchiampo's nonsense. Teacher Sanchiampo, who was in the middle of explaining the beginning of the Japanese invasions of Korea, suddenly got sidetracked when talking about Admiral Lee Sun-sin. When Admiral Lee Sun-sin broke his leg while taking the military service exam, he took the bark of a willow tree and wrapped it around himself, right? Why did Admiral Yi Sun-sin use willow bark? Simple splint? Or painkillers? Mr. Samjianpo's gossip, which had gone astray, was already reaching aspirant. Since humans recorded history, one of the most important topics has been creating a panacea. But the closest thing to this panacea is aspirin. It is used for its original purpose of reducing fever and pain, as well as treating vascular diseases and as an anti-cancer agent. For reference, in the life of Jin Ho, who was Hyang's previous life, one of the people Jin Ho's parents hated the most was teacher Samjianpo. You're abandoning the kids by not teaching them what you're supposed to do and only telling them nonsense. Anyway, Hyang, who recalled the memory of teacher Samjianpo, immediately ordered the Nuiwan to make tea from willow bark and presented it to King Sejong. Taking this can relieve headaches, thin the blood, and prevent chest tightness and stroke. It doesn't taste very good. It's medicine. Is there any medicine that tastes good? In this way, the monk who presented the Liupi tea gave the royal doctors a firm warning. Long clothing is necessary, but it is a medicine that should not be worn unconditionally. When the blood becomes thinner, it means that it becomes difficult to stop the bleeding. Please give it to Abima after some time off. Yes, sir. The father and son continued their conversation across the teacup. Crown, I plan to kill Yang Wujing. Those who sympathized with him will also be purged. Do you think it's too much? If it happens frequently, it may be a problem, but if not, I think the meaning of 1 punishment and 100 punishments is enough. Sejong looked like he had sighed at Hyang's words. Is that so? It's reassuring to think so. I thought it would be really lonely if you were also against it. It was those old monks who started this incident. Yes, but that's it. What do you think of the Yang Wujing's appeal against military mythology? At first glance, there is something right about it. It has become a daily routine for the king to exercise authority, and if someone like Jialju, Jieto, emerges as the future successor to the throne, the country will be headed for ruin, because no one knows what the future holds. The representative figures causing such controversy are Yi Sangan and Gwanghagen. The controversy over Gwanghagen has been resolved to some extent, but Yi Sangan is left out. Isn't it? The mainstream assessment is that Yi Sangan was a tyrant, but there are also counter-arguments. If you look at the central politics of Joseon after King Sejong, the trend of the military weak and strong continued. Although King Songjong strengthened the royal authority, it was not enough to completely overthrow it. However, the person who completely turned that around is Yonson. He used his mother's death as a royal servant and death as an excuse. However, in order to show off his strengthened royal authority, he did something outrageous and forgot about his cause and the support of the people, which is a defeat. Thanks to this, the King Yeongjong rebellion took place and the military became weak again. Well, King Yeongjong was not an easy person, but Sejong nodded at Hyang's answer. That is correct, because I never thought a child like you would be born. It means good things. When Hyang made a sour expression, Sejong quickly added. Hyang, who was grumbling internally, continued speaking. If a tyrant appears and practices tyranny, it is natural that it will lead to the ruin of the country. To prevent this, it is naturally necessary to guarantee and maintain divine authority. However, if we look at the current state of Joseon, the divine power still threatens the royal power. To be precise, the power of the king is very weak compared to the power of the government officials and noblemen. King took the paper he had placed next to him. Kyang drew a square on a piece of paper and divided it into 4 squares. Then, he drew hatched lines on 3 of the 4 squares. This is the current state of Joseon. The hatched part here is the power held by the nobility, and the remaining space is the power of the king. No matter what, it won't be more than 1 space, right? In response to Sejong's rebuttal, Kyang shook her head. This only appears because those noblemen cooperate with the kingship for their own power struggle. If they see that the royal power is going to take away their rights, they will immediately join forces. I guess so. Sejong nodded at the explanation of the scent and sighed. Whoa. It won't be easy to ask them to give up what they have. We'll have to use another method. It's not about directly taking away what they have. It's about increasing the stake. Sejong's eyes began to sparkle at Hyang's words. Increasing the plate? We are using merchants and public figures to increase Joseon's economic and national power. It is about increasing the size of Joseon. For the incense, I drew 3 squares of the same size as the first square drawn and divided them into squares again. The basis of their wealth comes from agriculture. The goal is to foster commerce and industry, increase economic power through trade, and expand territory to increase the number of self-employed farmers. If that happens, they will be relatively weak. If you look at this picture, you can see that at first, they held 3/4 of Joseon in their hands and controlled Joseon from the left to the right, but when they grow in size like this, they only have 3/16 of it. It falls from 70.5 to 20.5, that is, it weakens by more than 1/3. They are taking advantage of their weakened position to tax them as well. If that happens, they too will have no choice but to follow the trend. Sejong hit his knee at Hyang's words. I see. There was such a move. King Sejong was happy to hear Hyang's answer, but he soon pointed out a problem. But, even if merchants and public figures are fostered, the gentry must ultimately become the main force of consumption. This is because ordinary people do not have sufficient financial resources. Then is it possible to grow as big as you said? Abima. Look broadly. Look broadly? Are you talking about trade? Also. Hyang nodded, impressed by Sejong's understanding. That's right. We are growing bigger through trade. I see. If we engage in trade, we can escape the limitations of land and grow in size. If noblemen were tied to the land like they are now, they wouldn't be able to keep up with the speed at which they are growing in size. There is a limit to the produce that comes from farmland. That's right. Let the simp be positive. Sejong immediately pointed out the problem. But, growing the scale of commerce and industry requires seed money. And most of the wealth that becomes the seed money is held by those noblemen. If those noblemen invest their wealth in commerce and industry, wouldn't their power only increase differently than you expected? Hyang nodded at Sejong's point. That's right. Seed money is needed to grow commerce and industry, and seed money is also needed to engage in trade. If the government is idle, those noblemen will become the rulers and monopolize the profits. In order to prevent that, this Joseon, or to be more precise, the government, must become Jeonju. Does the adjustment have to be the previous week? In response to King Sejong's question, Hyang explained the concept of a bank, or to be more precise, a national bank. After hearing the explanation, King Sejong looked impressed. I see. If we do that, merchants who need seed money will be able to borrow seed money at low interest, and the government will be able to control the movement of wealth. Once coordination takes control, it can create a new market called the investment market. Investment market? It is a market where seed money is treated as a commodity and traded. Sejong stroked his beard and was lost in thought. Sejong, who thought for a moment, opened his mouth. If we move as you said, we will need a very large number of officials. Isn't this beneficial to the noblemen? There is a need for professionals who are more familiar with the field than those who studied abroad. To put it simply, the number of people entering government positions through miscellaneous courses is increasing significantly. That's a problem too. There are quite a few people who strain their necks and do other things as soon as they take office. There is a saying, if you want power, give up wealth, and if you want wealth, give up power. However, it is also true that it is difficult to make a living with the current salary. We need to make the green bonus a reality and at the same time put shackles on it. Hyang explained the concept of alchemy and how to use it as a shackle and continued. If you look at the current civil service examination, in principle, only people of heaven can take the exam, but in reality, most of the applicants are noblemen. Ordinary people do not have the time to study comfortably. In that case, one way would be to screen and select bright people among those with the minimum level of education and then train and use them through the government. Do you mean to educate all the people? I think it is reasonable to guarantee at least the opportunity to receive a minimum education if you are a citizen. Shouldn't the people be aware of this so that they can avoid injustice, and if they have been wronged, they can confess it to the country? Sejong fell silent at Hyang's words. Sejong, who had been thinking for a while, opened his mouth. There are two most important issues. One is the budget, and the other is text. The budget can be resolved by developing mines and changing the tax system, as you said, but the text is a difficult problem. I'm sure Abima will be able to solve it. Aren't you trusting this father too much? No. Sejong smiled at Hyang's firm belief. I shouldn't be a shameful father. While King Sejong and Hyang were talking about the future as a topic, some of the officials of Saganwon were gathering in a room in Namcheon and talking. However, while King Sejong and Hyang were discussing in a friendly atmosphere, the mood among the officials was one of bitterness and indignation. You're imprisoning captains. This can't be happening. That's right. The law is collapsing, the law. All the drunken officers raised their voices and expressed their anger. Meanwhile, there was one person who raised his voice the most. The main culprit of all these evil deaths is Seiya. A little boy who is only 10 years old is trying to control the country's affairs. This is absurd. Look, Goshong. We need to change the crown prince. Hey, Joseon. A fellow officer next to him urgently tried to stop him, but the officer called Go Chong kept his spirits up. Why? Did I say something wrong? It is not true that the laws of state affairs were violated when the crown prince intervened. No matter what, you are the national model of the country. As the old ambassador said before, you shouldn't say those words carelessly. What kind of humiliation is such an old man going through now? That part can be appealed. Don't you know the term gizijuaman? I don't know if it's only you who will be harmed, but are you planning to cause harm to your family and the monks as well? The job of a magistrate is to speak the truth, so why is it a problem? It's all about time and place. Following his colleague's advice, Joseon had to keep his mouth shut. However, Joseon, who could not control his anger, emptied his glass repeatedly. As time passed and the atmosphere flowed, Joseon hugged the shoulder of the Joseon sitting next to her with wide-open eyes and made a move. Hey, why don't you share the feeling of clouds and rain with me today? The medicinal liquor was too much. Since you have too much alcohol, please share the fate of the rain next time. When the Joseon politely refused with a smile, Joseon's face became fierce. Yes, you bitch. What a mean thing. If I tell you to do it, you can do it. The smile disappeared from the Joseon's face at Joseon's verbal abuse. The Joseon, with her back straight, argued with Joseon. Isn't a Joseon a celestial person who is below the ranks of sanctuaries, farmers, and merchants, and is like an animal wearing only human skin? But how can a nobleman share the fate of beasts and rain? Do you have a peculiar odor? You bitch. At the Joseon's words, Joseon jumped up from his seat, and his face changed from bright red to pale blue. The Joseon in front of me was now asking herself, are you a pervert who commits bestiality? The drinking party, which had been filled with music and laughter just a moment ago, suddenly became quiet, and my colleague got up to stop Joseon. Look here, Joseon. Yes, you bitch. Do you want to die? Are you boasting about your power over just a Joseon? You speak like a nobleman, but you act like a person like no other in the world. Why don't you try killing him? Yes, you bitch. Jump up. Just when Joseon couldn't stand it anymore and was about to swing his fist, the door burst open. In front of the open door, a tall man stood with his arms crossed, holding a long bamboo staff in his arms. Joseon hesitated and retreated from the giant's force. The giant who was glaring at Joseon opened his mouth. You've had too much alcohol. How about you return home today? That would be great. Hey, Joseon, let's go back now. A colleague tried to mediate, but Joseon was unable to do anything. I felt like I wanted to kick this arrogant Joseon right now, but I couldn't even do that when I saw Jang Han standing there. A colleague saw this and roughly pulled Joseon's arm. Hey, Joseon, I drank too much today. Let's go back now. With that, the officers left the drinking party. The voice of a Joseon was heard behind Joseon being dragged out. Congratulations. Nari's name will soon spread throughout Hanseong. Yes, you bitch. Ruler. Stop it. Joseon screamed, but his colleague forcibly held him and left the room. Of course, it was natural to be ripped off in a huge amount. As the Joseon assured, it took less than a day for the rumor about Joseon to spread throughout Hanseong. As soon as the rumor spread that an official of Sagan was drinking and behaving at a Joseon's house, government ministers came forward and investigated the incident. When the investigation began, officials came forward and began to protest. This is a tyranny that seeks to persecute Sagan and block the communication route. This is ignoring precedent. It was the officials who risked their necks to argue with not only the minister, but also the king if they felt something was wrong. Therefore, they were given considerable freedom in return for the risks they faced. There was no respect for officers among their ranks, and it was customary not to be reprimanded for drinking to the point of intoxication during working hours. In other words, it was customary until now to turn a blind eye to even the slightest bit of trouble. But this time, the ministers had a justification. Not only did he force a courtesan owned by the state to sleep with him, but he tried to use violence against it. This is a disgrace to the name of government officials and noblemen. In the end, after an investigation, Joseon was caught, and King Sejong made a ruling. It is the gravest sin of all mortal sins for a state official who is supposed to impeach an injustice to believe in his own authority and instead commit an injustice. The criminal shall be immediately removed from his official position and sentenced to exile for 500 miles. I follow your orders. According to King Sejong's order, Joseon immediately went into exile. However, in the case of Joseon, the treatment was more severe. In general, when a person in public office was sentenced to exile, He left his home and was often not accompanied by a transfer officer. In addition, it was customary for the government to provide horses and food, and to allow the son or slave of the convict to follow him and serve him. But in the case of Joseon, he was exiled by being placed in a hamgeo, chanchured, with a sword around his neck. I had to go up. The reason for this was that during the investigation, it was revealed that Joseon had said, "The crown prince must be abolished." After receiving the report, King Sejong became furious and added his brother. Mentioning a deposed crown prince is a crime of high treason. However, since these words were spoken by a small person who was violent towards Joseon, I will not go to the point of death. However, change the exile from 500 miles to 1,000 miles, put a sword around his neck, and send him in a ship. I follow your orders. Of course, King Sejong already knew about this through previous appeals. As soon as he received the appeal, he could have been punished, but he was waiting for the present situation to come. As a result, officials had to watch their mouths. After hearing the full story of the incident in the East Palace, Kiang whetted his appetite. They say that when it comes to mouth, the Joseon's mouth is the best in the world. That's really scary. As Hyang said, Joseon's willingness to be generous was famous. When the Jayujiang rebellion occurred and Suyan came to power, the government's officials once had a drinking party at a Joseon's house. While he was very drunk, one of the men asked a Joseon he liked to sleep with him. "Yesterday you were compatible with that man, and today you are compatible with this man. How about matching compatibility with me this time?" The Joseon immediately accepted the minister's words. "Yesterday you entered Gyeongbokgung Palace, and today you enter Myeongnigung Palace, Suyan's residence, so I, Anoria Janghwa, will be the best match." King Sejong did not only judge Joseon's crimes. The criminal Ryu Jeonhaen tried to lead the king down a wrong path with his narrow opinions, which can be said to be a delusion of the king. Therefore, Ryu Jeonhaen will be put to death, and all of his subordinates will be made officials. Also, let his wealth be lost. I follow your orders. In addition, Worijong, Jwajeon, Daesagan, and Daesahyun, who formed the party together with him, will be exiled 2,000 ri away. However, Gasol will be left as civilians, but 80% of his property will be lost. I follow your orders. Accordingly, the old officials who were famous in the early years of King Sejong's reign met an end that was different from their original history. In particular, in the case of Ryu Jeonhaen, he was a civil servant who lived through the turbulent times of the end of the Goryeo dynasty and the beginning of the Seon dynasty, and he was appointed to the position of the Samgun Dotansa and led the conquest of Tsushima under Lee Jong-mu. He was evaluated as having laid the foundation for cultural prosperity during the reign of King Sejong, but unlike his original history, he became a center of delusion of military power and met his end. It was a bitter example of the butterfly effect created by an unexpected entity called fragrance. But the most unlucky person was Wu Yuijong. The previous year, on October 21st, the 5th year of King Sejong's reign, Zhang Tak, who had been a Weizhong, died at the age of 61, and he was appointed to the position on the recommendation of Ryu Jeonhaen. He ascended to the position of Weizhong, and within a few months he lost his power and property and was sentenced to exile. In March, King Sejong, who had completely taken power through Ryu Jeonhaen's review and the exile of the old officials, gathered his ministers and made a declaration. "I will implement the Jiangjang, Gungjam, for this Joseon." With King Sejong's declaration, Daegyeongjang began, which took 10 years to prepare and 5 years to execute. This was the beginning of Daegyeongjang, which was later evaluated as completely changing the constitution of Joseon. Historians consider the day as the beginning of King Sejong's declaration and named it Gapjin Jiangjang, Jiachen Gungjam, or Gapjin Daegyeongjang, Jiachen Dagungjam. The base of the sutra that King Sejong declared he would execute was Hyang's work. Long before King Sejong's declaration, it was when they were preparing to vaccinate the people living in Hanseon. In the middle of the night, Sejong searched for incense. "Please take the chart you made." "Yes, please do so." "Thanks. Merchant ships should take note of their orbit." "Yes, Your Highness." According to King Sejong's order, a merchant ship took control of the scent. "Oh, and don't tell anyone that I took this." "Yes, yes." After King Sejong took the chart, King realized that he had dug a grave. After the assembly was over and some time had passed, King Sejong found the scent. This part right here, yes, that is, King Sejong, who had a question while examining the horoscope, looked for the incense and asked a question, and the incense answered the question. "Then don't go. Good work." "No." After seeing King Sejong off, King put her head on the table and sighed. "Huh. I dug my own grave. Before we knew it, King Sejong's visit had become a daily routine. It was okay up to that point. The problem was that as time passed, the depth and sharpness of the questions King Sejong was asking were increasing almost vertically. In the end, King's daily life became a series of overwork. In the morning, he had to attend a contest. In the morning, he had discussions with the guests of Crown Prince Sigunwon, or attended an assembly to observe state administration, and in the afternoon, he had to take a regular course in training martial arts with the military officer of the Nagamwi. And from the evening, he had to do laundry work in preparation for King Sejong's visit. Who would believe me if I said, it all came from my head? I don't believe it either. Or, it goes from morning to night. By the time the source washing work was finished, King Sejong came in. After a round of Q&A with King Sejong, the third view, 11 a.m. to 1 a.m., had already passed, and we were heading toward the fourth view. And it was when King Sejong declared the general that Hyang learned the full story of what had happened. King Sejong took the map of incense with him and began to create a master plan to reform Joseon's overall system based on it. The biggest purpose of Jiangjang is the realization of royal politics and Hangik Ingensa. King Sejong created a plan for the Jiangjang while skillfully using the punctuation marks he learned through incense. Starting from the reform of administrative organization to the expansion of education, King Sejong made a plan by creating a framework and fleshing it out. When a question arose or a blockage occurred, King Sejong waited for the right time and visited Hyang every night. Through that process, when it reached about 80% completion, King Sejong tossed the plan for the palace to Joseon. This is a sutra book written by Gwain. Look deeply and see what needs improvement or problems. I accept your command. If there are any points or problems that need improvement, submit them to the manager immediately in writing. Yes, Your Highness. Also, please keep quiet about this until the official makes an official announcement. If anyone speaks out, they will be punished for high treason. I will keep each and every bone in mind. The scholars of Joseon, who received the scriptures from King Sejong, did their best to analyze them. However, difficulties were encountered from the start. What only Sejong and Hyang knew was the punctuation marks. Majesty, what do these symbols come from? Ah, that is, the scholars of Joseon, who learned about punctuation marks from King Sejong, began an intensive analysis of the sutra, and it was from then on. The level of difficulty of the questions asked by Sejong to Hyang increased to an almost vertical level. When Joseon found a problem and reported it to King Sejong thought about a solution to the problem. Even if he continued to think about it, when he couldn't find an answer, King Sejong looked for assent and discussed it. When a good answer was found, King Sejong tossed the answer to Joseon, who applied the answer and began analysis again. The police officer was announced, and Hyang, who found out about this, complained to King Sejong. Wouldn't it have been more efficient if we had had Soja work with the Joseon scholars? Sejong smiled and responded to Hyang's complaint. You guy, don't you know that there is a big difference between knowing and doing and not knowing? It is about changing the entire country, but if the king does not understand it properly, the king will just say, do it, and stamp the royal seal. If you listen to the explanation in advance, which will lead to better results, the king directly stepping in to think and understand, or just listening and understanding? King bowed her head deeply at Sejong's words. Soja, I can't help but admire Abamama's insight. This was the sincerity of the fragrance. The basis of the sutra announced by King Sejong was incense, but the color of incense was so diluted that it was difficult to say that it was incense. It was the sutra that King Sejong's thoughts went into so deeply. The reason it took 10 years to prepare even after King Sejong announced the sutra was because he put so much effort into it that it was almost paranoid. Even though he declared a peace ceremony, King Sejong did not immediately change everything. Starting with finances, preparations were made step by step, and the framework of the palace was reworked while going through small and large issues that occurred in between. When it was thought that preparations had been completed to some extent, King Sejong gave orders to his ministers. The ministers of the 6 dynasties should select personnel. King Sejong began experimenting with creating a scaled-down model of the new administration. To be more precise, a scaled-down model of the central government, with people selected from the 6 dynasties. In fact, we started coordinating with ministers by observing in real time the division of work and operational efficiency created through reports and petitions coming from local and field areas. Once the experiment on reorganizing the central government was somewhat successful, Sejong began experimenting with local administrative organizations. Select 5 counties in Gwanggi-do, 7 in Gyeonggi-do, and 5 in Gangwon-do. The selection process was not random. Select a place similar to the environment of Wanghe-do in the northwestern region of Joseon, Gangwon-do in the northeastern region of Joseon, and Gyeonggi-do in the central and 3 southern regions of Joseon. It must be an area that is 1 day, or at most 2 days, from Hanseong using Pabalma, Babulma. After the strings were selected, the full-scale experiment began. It was an experiment on a huge scale, with new personnel assigned according to the local administrative organization created by King Sejong, and a large number of investigators, scholars of Gyeonggi and officials of the central government, to observe their actions. As the experiment began, trains loaded with reports written by those directly in charge of administration and reports written by investigators, ran from the prefectures where the experiment was being conducted to Hanseong every day. While looking at the reports, King Sejong, Kiang, and the ministers continued to coordinate. Despite such careful coordination, once the project was properly implemented, problems large and small emerged from all directions. In the end, it took 5 years to resolve the problems, make adjustments, and establish the system. But now, following the announcement of the start of the race, the first button was just being put on. As King Sejong ordered the nationwide implementation of cowpox vaccination, pack horses carrying King Sejong's order in their arms ran to the 8 provinces of the country. Following King Sejong's order, all local officials across the country began preparing for cowpox vaccination. In the midst of this, noise began to emerge, and its epicenter was local officials. You want me to pay the price? Here is a handwritten order from His Highness the Lord. Local noblemen and noblemen are recommending paying a high price. The officials who saw the letters presented by the governors or county officials were troubled. Since the king wants it, I must follow his orders. We are helping not only our family members but also our neighbors, so we have to pay. A significant number of noblemen readily offered the price without saying anything. The officials sent by the governor recorded the facts without exception, and the records went straight up to the government. I can't pay. All of our family members have already suffered from smallpox at least once, so there is no need to get beaten. Of course, among them, there were quite a few who refused because they thought the price was too expensive. The reason they were able to come out like that was because King Sejong did not force them to do it, but said, I recommend it. Of course, it would have been common sense to follow even if the king had written, I recommend. But there were people who were so blinded by wealth that they forgot common sense. Look here, Master Quan. Still I can't pay. Although the local governor and other officials continued to recommend it, there were some who stubbornly persisted until the end. Thanks to this, the prefectures, who felt uncomfortable, had to write appeals hoping for a non-answer. Have you seen these cheeky people? King Sejong, who accepted the appeal, did not hide his anger. Sejong, clutching the scroll of appeal, stared at the empty seats of the 3 monks, the Daesagan, and the Daesahian, then turned his gaze toward the 6th dynasty ministers. Merchant Marine, read this appeal out loud. Yes, Your Highness. Sangsean, who received the appeal from King Sejong, read the contents of the appeal in a loud voice. As the reading continued, the heads of the 6th dynasty ministers increasingly turned toward the floor. As soon as the merchant ship's reading was finished, King Sejong opened his mouth. Are you really saying that these are the noblemen and the village elders? I am devastated. The total number of appeals submitted so far is over 50. 22. Are these really noblemen? Are they the ones who declared that they will go to public office and brighten Joseon? I am devastated. Indeed, Sejong, who could not hold back his anger, stuttered. King, who saw the shape from the side, was startled. It goes beyond that. Danger. Abama, let my anger subside. Your body is in disrepair. Woda. Hearing Hyang's words, Sejong took a long deep breath and began to let go of his anger. Hyang continued speaking urgently. They have already proven themselves to be false princes. How fortunate is this? From now on, it will be okay if we do not treat them like noblemen. I'm actually glad that this incident has put the spotlight on the rock. Sejong took a long breath at Hyang's words and opened his mouth. That is correct what the crown prince said. Through this incident, I learned what they really think of this country called Joseon and its people. Please make a list of those who have not paid the price until the end of this vaccination. Also, please minimize the number of people who cannot receive vaccinations by having the people in the villages where those who refuse to pay the surcharge live receive help from surrounding villages to get vaccinated. However, exclude from vaccination the gasoline of those who did not pay the premium. If you did something, you should take responsibility. I follow your orders. Then let's take a break. I'm very tired. Yes. When the ministers of the six dynasties bowed and retired, King immediately opened his mouth. I will call the doctor right away. You just need to rest a little. You are very heartbroken. Joseon can run properly only when Abima is healthy. Sejong looked pleased at Hyang's words. I feel like everything is getting better just by hearing you. Yes, I guess so. Merchant Marine, call the doctor. The royal doctor who rushed to receive the call from the merchant ship immediately caught King Sejong's pulse. My Mac is beating a bit violently, but it's nothing to worry about. I will prepare soup for you, so please eat it and take a rest for a while. I will do it. After a while, Hyang saw that King Sejong was resting with a peaceful face after drinking the decoction brought by the royal doctor, and only then did he come out of the main hall. When Hyang returned to his room, he finally sighed. Whoa, it was breathtaking. Still, it looks like that willow bark was worth the price of the meal. King Sejong's pulse remained stable as he drank tea made from willow bark. As I sat on the chair and drank tea, I muttered softly, our nuclear powerhouse sister is also alive, so she should live a long and healthy life. According to the original history, Princess Jeongso should have died in February. The problem was the cause of death. In the records I only glanced at in the 21st century, the cause of death was unclear. Some records said it was chickenpox, while others said it was smallpox. What is the 50% chance? Kyang, who knew that King Sejong had suffered a great psychological shock when Princess Jeongso died, risked everything and inoculated Princess Jeongso with cowpox at a 50% chance. And the 50% probability was correct. As the nationwide implementation of cowpox vaccination is coming to an end, Sejong has definitely reached the end. King Sejong summoned Judge Li Zhou and gave orders. Has the list of those who did not pay the premiums been completed? Yes, it is complete. Bring it with you. After a while, the official of the Joseon dynasty who received the order brought the list and submitted it to the Pansio, who handed it to the merchant ship. Sejong, who was examining the list handed over from the merchant marine, opened his mouth. There are so many. A total of 143 people are coming. In the list submitted by Pansio Lee, names, families, areas of residence, and property were all recorded. Sejong looked at the list and gave an order. Make sure that everyone listed on this list is erased from the county. If there are people who pass the Sabor exam and receive tax exemption benefits, they should withdraw all gifts immediately. Lastly, their descendants will be prohibited from going to work for 3 generations. I follow your orders. This decision caused a great tectonic shift among the local nobles. As King Sejong's order was carried out, local Confucianism suffered a great storm. This is too much. Those whose names were cut from Hyangan, according to King Sejong's orders, protested fiercely, but not many people agreed with their claims. Most reactions were as follows. TSK, TSK, TSK. So, I should have been greedy. How much does that thing cost? If you are a nobleman and a nobleman, shouldn't you live up to your name? You must know shame and duty. Hurry and get out of here. A person who is not a nobleman. Where is this place? Those who were kicked out screamed at the closed gate of the Yuhyangso. How clean you guys are. The aftermath of King Sejong's order did not end there. What are these appeals? Sejong looked at Du Sung-ji as the appeal suddenly poured in like a mountain. Du Sung-ji answered the question with an embarrassed face. This is an appeal from fathers to allow their daughters to divorce. Please allow divorce? King Sejong opened the scroll and read its contents. The contents of the appeals were largely the same. The son-in-law lost his qualifications as a scholar official due to his lack of shame and morality. If you have experienced something like this, it is natural to be cautious and reflect, but he claims that he is innocent and does not reflect at all. He is even drunk and uses violence against his wife, my daughter. Please allow my daughter and her wife to divorce. Unlike the Goryeo dynasty, when marriage and divorce were easy, the Joseon dynasty made marriage and divorce very difficult for noblemen. In order for noblemen to get divorced, they had to file an appeal not only to the local leader but also to the king. King Sejong reviewed all the appeals and came to a conclusion. Using violence against Jogang Jikyo is not worthy of a nobleman. However, since it is impossible to come to a conclusion just by listening to one side, order the head of the town where the person who filed the lawsuit resides to confirm the facts. If the contents of the complaint are true, he shall grant the divorce and order the division of property to be fair. I follow your orders. As soon as King Sejong's order was issued, numerous couples divorced. Divorce was not the only thing that occurred. The number of marriage breakups, which do not require as complicated a procedure as divorce, was several times that much. King Sejong's palace was being prepared step by step over a long period of time. However, there was one place that was surprisingly fast, and that was the military department. King Sejong, who was in the midst of discussing state affairs with ministers, took a moment to visit the East Palace. When the eunuch who was standing in front of Hyang's door tried to say something, King Sejong lightly waved his hand. "Sure, I want to see the crown prince's usual appearance." The eunuch responded to King Sejong's words by pointing to one side with a perplexed expression. "Your Majesty, the crown prince is currently in Haewuseo." "Haewuseo? Chukin is coming." "Uh-huh. Haewukok. What a charming name." Sejong nodded and looked at the direction indicated by the eunuch. A court lady with a cotton cloth in her hand was standing in front of a room located in a corner of the East Palace. Shoot! As soon as there was a loud sound of water, the court lady who was standing there quickly opened the door and entered. After a while, Hyang came out with a refreshed face and a book on one side of her, and when she saw Sejong, she ran over and bowed her head. "Abama, are you here? I am devastated by your disgrace. What kind of indecency is, by the way, reading a book from the side? It reads surprisingly well." "Well, I like books too." Sejong shook his head with an expression of disgust at Hyang's answer. Haewuseo, or to be more precise, the toilet built in the bathroom, was something that I had firmly decided to make since I was a wonja, Yunzu. For that reason, from the point when he was appointed as crown prince and thought that his ability was recognized to some extent by King Sejong by making a gold pin, Hyang attempted to manufacture toilets. However, the production of toilets encountered a big problem from the start. The toilet with the familiar scent was made of ceramics. However, the historical background of the Joseon dynasty was problematic. The place that supplied various porcelains for the royal family was Songbang, and the porcelain supplied here was through donations. In the end, I had to find the kiln that produced the pottery myself, and the closest place was Gwangju, Gyeonggi-do. After the Neo-Beelseum incident, Hyang's scope of activities was limited to Hanseon, and Hyang himself did not even think of going all the way to Gwangju, Gyeonggi-do. They say it's a quick car ride in the 21st century, but it's Joseon now, right? In the end, Hyang had to find an alternative. Hyang searched through her memories for various alternatives, and finally found one. What Hyang found was a scene from a movie in which the single-minded, pure-hearted, macho mummy, who shouted, "Anak Sunaman," until the end, was Jinju's artificial intelligence. It reminded me of the iron toilet in the bathroom where the kid escapes from the train, which is a key keyword in the movie. As soon as he recalled his memory, Hyang created a conceptual drawing and a brief blueprint, and immediately went to the ball shop at Gyeonggi City. It was from then on. Gong Yejong's penance began. Hyang created a blueprint, but it came close to organizing the concept. To find the actual figures, field manager Gong had to conduct an experiment himself. This was also the case in the 21st century. Even when Hyang, Jinho in the 21st century, built a steam engine with his friends, Hyang was in charge of the concept and overall design, and all numerical calculations had to be done by his friends. I'm a liberal arts major. Will the liberal arts department even do the calculations? Anyway, after all sorts of trial and error, Gong Yejong created a steel toilet. Good job, good job. After seeing the completed toilet, Hyang greatly praised Gong Yejong. Not only did he give praise in words, but the mayor also rewarded Gong Yejong with an island of white rice, and to the village leaders below him from 5 to 1 mal of white rice according to their rank. After receiving the unexpected reward, Field Marshal Gong bowed low and shouted, "Please entrust us with anything from now on. I will do my best to make it. Believe and expect." In later years, whenever he looked back on the events of that time, Gong Yejong would hit himself in the mouth. This guy's snout is the enemy. Anyway, when King Sejong saw the toilet created and the toilet installed in that way, he wanted to install a toilet in Junjeongjin as well. However, King Sejong's intention was thwarted by opposition from the royal scholars. To check His Majesty's health, we must check his bowel movements, but we can't confirm it in this condition. Is it? I understand. King Sejong took a step back due to the opposition of the medical doctors, but King Sejong did not give up his will. I will install it someday. In the end, toilets were not installed in Junjeongjin, but toilets were installed in quite a few places other than Donggungjin. The place where toilets were installed was where the royal palace and concubines were located. It was never comfortable to do work while squatting on the bed. Especially when I was pregnant and had a full stomach, the toilet was the best item. Of course, it was a difficult task for the court ladies and court ladies who had to remove the excrement containers located in the space installed under the bathroom floor and fill the toilet tank with water. Later, these toilets began to be released to the private sector, and various problems arose as a result. And to solve this problem, it was inevitable that the county would completely overturn the public hygiene system. The scent that came out of Haewuso moved to the study with King Sejong. Sejong, facing the incense at the center of the large table, immediately opened his mouth. Crown, I came back because I had a question while looking at the chart you made again. What question do you have? You mentioned many areas, but you did not mention just one area, the military. You can't possibly be unaware of it? Kiang smiled at Sejong's question. Sejong shook his head at that sight. Like this kind of snot. If Soja had mentioned the military, there would have been an even bigger uproar. Sejong nodded at those words. That's right. What do you think, Abima? Sejong answered firmly to Hyang's question. The military also needs to be overhauled. I think we should place greater emphasis on intellect, rather than looking only at individual power as we have done so far. Hyang nodded at Sejong's words. In the last 4 years of Sejong set a new standard for military examinations. The civil service examination is for selecting talented people. This is also true in the past. From now on, even if you cannot hit an arrow at a distance of 200 paces, if you are well versed in the scriptures, you will be selected. Some said that this favored the civil servants and looked down on the military gods, but Hyang thought differently. Even Jedi die in Daggle. What Abimama said is not wrong. From now on, we need smart people. Who was that? Can't you think of it? Anyway, I'll use it. Mumbling in her mind, Kyang immediately opened her mouth. Soja thinks like this. To the nation, the gates and martial arts are like the arms of a person and the 2 wheels of a cart. It is difficult for a person to live with only one arm, and a cart cannot move with only one wheel. I believe that in a country, civility and martial arts are exactly the same. Sejong nodded strongly at Hyang's words. What you say is truly correct. So, I am also thinking about reform. However, Sejong sighed. The ministers who are sticking their butts to that side will immediately argue with that statement. Defense is something that costs thousands of gold, or even 10,000 gold, and it refers to the military regime that existed in the previous dynasty. But you can't look down on Radish. Then, this Joseon will immediately collapse. Please consider the precedent of the Song dynasty. Kyang, who had quenched her thirst with the tea brought by the Naquan, spoke. There was an empire in the west called Rome. It is said that there was something like this in the proverb of that country. Civis pacem parabellum. What did you mean? If you want peace, prepare for war. It means having no regrets. It's Yubi Muwan, banging the table with his fingers. King Sejong pondered the words, Yubama. Kyang added words to that sight. You don't have to go far. Look at the final leaves of the omen. How many people suffered hardships due to the Jurchen tribe and Japanese pirates? It is true that national defense consumes a lot of money, but if you are not properly prepared when something happens, you will have to spend several times that amount of money and manpower. You are right. What you said, Sejong shook his head and came to a conclusion. Okay, if it has to be repaired, then it has to be repaired. As Sejong made up his mind, Kyang clenched his fist under the table. Yes. Sejong, who had made up his mind, asked Hyang again a question. Military reform is not something that can be done overnight, so we will have to take our time and solve it one by one. Where do you think I should start? The Northern Army that has to deal with aftershocks? Or the Southern Army that has to deal with Japanese pirates? Or the Central Army that must defend the capital? Kyang immediately answered King Sejong's question. We must divide into the Army and Navy. The Navy, or rather the Kizian Army, must never be ignored. Sugin? That's right. Kyang's voice as he explained was gaining more and more strength. Soja, when I first talked about opening a superior office, I thought briefly and talked about Ming Shandong. Afterwards, I greatly regretted it and ultimately despaired. Despair? Why? The trade port created in Shandong will not only be used by the Ming and Joseon dynasty. If the products of Ming and Joseon come together, countries seeking trade will eventually gather there as well. The nearby Japanese kingdom would also head there, and the distant Dewi kingdom and even further away countries would gather for trade. Think of the wealth that will be gained from those who gather like that. At Hyang's words, King Sejong recalled the tariff that his superiors had promised to pay to Myeongguk. The amount expected at the time was not small at all. That's the case with the Ming and Joseon dynasties alone. But what if the Japanese, Daewoo, and other unnamed countries are added to them? Sejong's heart became anxious. Then how about we create a trade port? It's a little late, but it looks like it will be competitive. That's where Soja despaired. Our Joseon, Kiang responded with a gloomy expression. There is no naval force that can control the sea. Sejong looked like he didn't understand Hyang's words. No naval forces? You don't understand? Nominally, we have a naval force, but when we look at its capabilities, it is heartbreaking. It's devastating. Have you forgotten that the last conquest of Tsushima was possible because of our navy? Why don't you know? Kiang got up from his seat and walked to the bookshelf in the study. Kiang, who came back after picking out a book among various books, opened the book to King Sejong and explained its contents. This is the record of the last Tsushima conquest. As you know, the total number of soldiers mobilized for the last Tsushima conquest was 17,285. The number of military ships mobilized is 227. I see. To put it simply, each ship carried 70 to 80 people, and more than half of these were soldiers. The actual power is only half. I see. There is another problem there. The number of ships, 227, is a very large number just by number. However, many of these ships are small enough that even crossing the strait between Busan and Tsushima requires risking one's life. I see. It is a well-known fact that our Joseon army is weak in single-armed combat compared to the Japanese pirates. To offset this, artillery is essential, but artillery cannot be loaded on a small ship like this. Is this a problem only for the 3 provinces' naval forces that participated in the expedition? Sejong's face became serious at the explanation of the fragrance. A problem is a problem. It is obvious that if a trading port is built, not only Japanese pirates but also pirates will flock to the area. The Ming dynasty can immediately gather the forces to defend against it, but our Joseon dynasty cannot. Please look at the recent conquest of Tsushima Island. No matter how much it was a conquest, looking at the wasting of troops, everyone had to be scraped together except for the lower-ranking soldiers and the farmers who were farming. What would have happened if Japanese pirates took advantage of the gap left for the conquest and invaded the station? Please take a look at the initial standards there. Not only did they gather combat troops, but they also gathered people who knew how to drive a ship. In other words, the navy itself is lacking. Sejong nodded at Hyang's point. Around the time of the Tsushima conquest, reports came in that the southern coast of the Ming dynasty was being plundered by Japanese pirates. Taejong, who received the report at the time, breathed a sigh of relief. It is truly a miracle from heaven and rain. Sejong nodded, recalling memories of the past. I see. Sejong's face as he answered was more serious than ever. This was because the memories of that time were vivid. With the conquest of Tsushima Island, Tsushima province promised to be subjugated, and around the same time, Japanese pirates suffered great losses in the Ming dynasty. As a result, the Japanese pirates' movements have been quiet in recent years, but no one can guarantee that the Japanese pirates will continue to be quiet. Hyang continued to speak, assuming the worst-case scenario. If the movements of pirates and pirates become so severe that they cannot be controlled, the Ming may issue an order to lift the ban on the sea. The idea is to block sea routes and move coastal residents inland. The Ming dynasty has a large land area, so they can afford to move their people inland, and inland water transport is also developed, so there will be no major worries. But what about our Joseon dynasty? Is there any land for the people to move to? We can implement an empty island policy, but this will result in tying our own hands and feet. Sejong nodded silently at Hyang's words. Kiang quenched his thirst for a moment and continued his speech. In the end, the optimal means of liberation that Joseon must choose is offensive defense. Wasn't the conquest of Tsushima Island also carried out for the same reason? We need to grow our ships and strengthen our firepower. Sejong nodded at Hyang's words. You are right. The problem is the budget. Yes, budget is an issue. In order to increase the budget, we need to increase tax revenue. But if we rely only on agriculture, the people will suffer. Ultimately, as I said before, we must expand our tax base by increasing trade. I see. Phew duh. Sejong let out a long sigh and got up from his chair. I came here to cool off for a while, but it feels like my baggage has increased. I am devastated. No. For Joseon to become wealthy and have a strong military, I, the monarch, have to suffer. In the end, King Sejong, who had been examining various issues, came to a conclusion. No matter what, it is only possible if you have wealth. If you don't have wealth, it's just a pavilion. After coming to a conclusion, King Sejong sent an official letter to local leaders across the country. Immediately find those who are good at prospecting and send them to the palace. Accordingly, local leaders began to search through the towns they ruled, find people skilled in prospecting, and send them to Hanseong. Meanwhile, in the royal court, King Sejong, Kiang, and ministers discussed what to look for first. We need to find gold and silver. You must not look for gold and silver. I can demand it as tribute from the Ming kingdom. But gold and silver are essential to secure resources for the budget. If Ming makes demands, we must negotiate diplomatically. As the debate continued tediously, King Sejong came to a conclusion. For the success of our Joseon dynasty's construction, gold and silver mining must be carried out. If the request arrives, then let's resolve it through diplomacy. I follow your orders. Once the problem of mining gold and silver was resolved, the topic moved on. Well, let's do that for gold and silver, and what else should we look for? The ministers immediately answered with one voice to King Sejong's question. Here comes copper. It is absolutely necessary for making canvas and printing money. In response to the ministers' answers, King Sejong wrote down gold, silver, and bronze with a gold pin and then opened his mouth. And what else? The ministers were all lost and fought at King Sejong's question. Kiang, who was watching that scene, intervened. Iron, coal, limestone, and sulfur, in my opinion. What is coal? Simply put, it is a stone that burns with fire. China has used it as fuel since the Song dynasty. In response to Sejong's question, Kiang explained about coal. King Sejong and the ministers who heard the explanation of the fragrance nodded. If such stones are used instead of firewood, damage to forests can be prevented. That's right. A lot of effort was put into preventing the invasion, but it was not easy. The reason was because it was used as fuel, and if we use coal, we can prevent overexploitation. Following the answers from the ministers, Kiang spoke. If the government monopolizes the supply of coal, this will also be a sufficient financial resource. I see. I understand coal and I understand iron, but why do we need limestone? It is necessary for iron smelting and construction. In architecture? Even small children only know theory. Sejong came to a conclusion based on Hyang's words. Then let's postpone the priority of limestone. Yes. Sejong postponed his priorities, but Hyang wasn't too upset. The most common thing on the Hell Peninsula is limestone. While listening to the conversation between King Sejong and the ministers, Hyang remembered the words of teacher Samcheonpo. Iron, coal, cement. It's a necessity that ushered in the Industrial Revolution. Simply put, these are the three basic sets of Korean food for the Industrial Revolution. Capital? Hey, without it, the Industrial Revolution wouldn't have happened. However, it was sulfur that caused the most controversy. Your Majesty, sulfur does not come from Joseon. That's right. Sulfur can only be obtained from the Ming or Japanese countries. Gwen knows that too. Crown Prince, sulfur does not come from our Joseon dynasty. Even though King Sejong said that sulfur was not produced in Joseon, Kiang did not give up on his wishes. Why are you so confident? Maybe it's something we haven't found yet? We couldn't find it? Abama. It grows in the Ming dynasty and in the Wei dynasty, but only in our Joseon dynasty it does not occur? Don't you think this makes no sense? Shit. I searched for crude oil, and it came out. I guess so, At Hyang's words, the ministers and King Sejong all seemed to think it was plausible and were in trouble. Of course, unlike Ming or Hua, it may be in a place where mining is difficult. But consider the uses of sulfur. Although it is used as a medicine, its most important use is as gunpowder. If you rely on imports of gunpowder, the most important item for national defense, and sulfur, the most important raw material for making gunpowder, you could end up in big trouble at any time. When Hyang mentioned defense, King Sejong and the ministers immediately came to a conclusion. Okay, let's find out. It appears that His Majesty the Crown Prince's opinion is correct. I think it's a good idea to tell prospectors to pay more attention. Eventually, sulfur was also included in the exploration list. When capable prospectors arrived from the 8 provinces of Joseon, King Sejong and his ministers created an organization called Jowanching, Tuyanting. First of all, make it a permanent institution under the Ministry of Public Affairs, and let the Minister of Public Affairs serve concurrently as the head. I follow your orders. The prospectors who belong to the National Resources Agency that was created in this way received grades from 8th grade to 9th grade, and green bonuses were also determined. Looking at the prospectors gathered in the front yard of Junjiangjan, the Minister of Public Works announced what to do. From now on, your job is to travel around the 8 provinces of Joseon and search for the minerals listed on this list. If you find it right, you will be rewarded, so do your best. The prospectors all bowed and responded to the words of the Gongzhou magistrate. I will do my best. Please, Your Majesty, please da. Upon hearing the merchant ship's cry, The prospectors immediately fell to the ground and bowed. The common people meet His Majesty the Lord. Stand up. Who said you were lowbor? You are all Gwain's precious people. At King Sejong's words, the prospectors all responded loudly with emotions on their faces. I am devastated. I wish you long life. The prospectors shouted at the top of their lungs that King Sejong may live long and prosperous. When Sejong, who was looking at the scene with a happy face, raised his hand, the noise became louder. When the prospectors became quiet, King Sejong continued, I'm sorry for entrusting you with such a difficult task. However, the wealth and strength of this Joseon depends on the results you produce, so I hope that you will do your best and do your job well. To King Sejong's words, all the prospectors bowed deeply and responded, I will do my best. After King Sejong's instructions, the prospectors dispersed throughout the country. The prospectors who packed their bags and left the palace opened a list to check the minerals they needed to find. I understand gold, silver, copper, and iron. But coal? What is this again? Ah, that's something I've heard of. It's a black, shiny stone. But they say it burns? I heard they use it as firewood in China. It's also used in blacksmith shops. A stone catches fire? Wow, it's a strange thing. Brimstone? Is this from our country? I guess since you don't know, you have to find it. Limestone? Isn't this a common stone? Is there anywhere I could use this? The prospectors, who were looking at the list and exchanging opinions, soon focused their attention on a corner of the list. Report the following ores as soon as they are discovered. A black, shiny stone, similar to coal, but brittle and brittle? What is this? Maybe I saw it. Maybe I didn't. The ore that confused the prospectors was an item with an additional fragrance. The name of the ore was graphite. A ship has arrived in Jamulpo. Is it? Did everyone come in without any problems? That's right. King Sejong, who obtained a falcon for hunting by order of Emperor Yongnak, dispatched Jinyungsa, Jinying-sir. Naturally, merchants followed the envoys, and they returned with great pleasure. Of course, the gift in return for the falcon offered as tribute was torn off in large chunks. And as always, half of the money received from the top was used to purchase rice. As a large amount of money was invested, the rice was brought to Jamulpo using ships from the Ming dynasty. Have the books and supplies arrived? Yes, Crown Prince. If King Sejong and his ministers were interested in grains, Qiang's interest lay elsewhere. What Qiang was interested in was the books that recorded Zhonghua's expeditions and the best items for resale. 2 days later, a huge number of chests entered the palace. Chests were placed in the front yard of Junjiamjin, and not only the ministers, but even King Sejong came out to the yard to check the contents. The chests were opened, and the scholars of Jifianjian, who were checking the contents, looked at King Sejong in surprise. Well, Your Highness, these all appear to be originals, not copies. What? Although the coordination was noisy due to the issue of nationwide expansion of cowpox vaccination, there were a lot of things that needed to be done separately, and King Sejong and the ministers handled them through discussion. How were the issues to be sent to the Ming dynasty resolved? The Yongtsang, Ying-sir, of the Yongbang, Yingfang, have caught 5 of them and are moving them. King Sejong frowned and responded to the minister's answers. There are 5. It must have been a lot of hardship for the responders and the people. I am devastated. Let's study the compensation system for this. I follow your orders. After resolving the issue of the falcon to be offered as tribute, King Sejong and the ministers moved on to the next item on the agenda. What would you like to receive in return for offering a falcon as tribute? First of all, sulfur and copper would be best. The Minister of Military Affairs did not want to miss the moment and mention sulfur. In a situation where gunpowder weapons became increasingly important, the supply of sulfur and copper was essential. However, since sulfur was not produced in Joseon, most of it had to be obtained from China and Japan, making supply difficult. The same was true for copper. No, copper was more difficult than sulfur. Copper was also not produced in Joseon, and the problem was that copper was a mineral that was not easy to export because of the large amount of internal consumption in the Ming and Japanese countries. In the end, copper and sulfur accounted for the largest portion of the tribute trade between Ming and Joseon, with books and cotton cloth accounting for the remainder. After continued discussion, a major consensus was reached by requesting sulfur and copper, according to the opinion of the Minister of Defense. And what else would you like? As soon as King Sejong spoke, assent came out. There is a book you must get. A book you must get? Qiang's remarks attracted the attention of King Sejong and the ministers. So what book was it? Aren't there a lot of scriptures in Joseon as well? It is not scripture. Here is Jeonghwa's voyage record. Jeonghwa's voyage record? When King Sejong expressed doubt, Yejo Panseo pretended to know. Among the emperor's eunuchs, there is a man named Jeonghwa. But what are the sailing records? They say he went on an expedition with a fleet under the emperor's orders. Gwaine also heard the rumor. King Sejong nodded at Yejo Panseo's answer. It wasn't just Sejong. Most ministers also nodded. In the 5th year of King Taejong's reign, the government was in an uproar due to rumors that a eunuch who had received orders from Emperor Yonghwa was going on an expedition with an extremely large fleet of ships. At that time, the Joseon dynasty government was on high alert when it received information that such a huge fleet was to be launched. What is the destination of that great fleet? Is it Joseon? Or is it Waeguk? While Taejong and the royal court were keeping watchful eyes, word was heard that the fleet in question was heading for a place farther out in the open ocean, neither Joseon nor Japan. Only after confirming that the rumor was true were King Taejong and the government able to relax. But why do you need those navigation records? In response to Sejong's question, King looked rather confused. Yes? Why do you need it? It is worth 1,000 pounds. Sejong asked the question, but Hyang's blood pressure rose when he saw that the ministers were also making similar expressions. This guy? No. These guys are real. King, who realized the seriousness of the situation, explained why Jeonghwa's navigation records were important. Jeonghwa visited countries that our Joseon dynasty could not go to, and that record is the voyage record. If we get the records, we can find out which countries have what our country needs. It's not just countries that know. You can reduce trial and error by knowing in advance the route to get there, the time required, and the risks. Is that so? Maybe so. Ku. After hearing Hyang's explanation, King Sejong shook his head and showed little understanding, but the other ministers showed that they were still not sure. At that sight, Kang's blood pressure rose and he became depressed. These guys are really. They're not old men from the countryside who don't know what's going on in the world. King regained his composure and gave an easily understandable example. Think of the Gakgun, Jalgong, the most important weapon of our Joseon soldiers. The most important material used in Gakgun is water buffalo horn. But where can I get this ox shell now? It is mainly obtained from Mingguk. But is Myeongguk giving it away easily? Not at all. To Hyang's question, all the ministers answered with one voice. Joseon's Gakgun was famous for its powerful power. Because of this, the Ming dynasty did not sell many buffalo horns, the main material for the horn bow. Because of this, Joseon even talked about selling the water buffalo, but there was no response until now. Therefore, although the Joseon government strictly prohibited smuggling, it actively encouraged smuggling only for buffalo horns. In the end, many of the buffalo horns that Joseon needed had to be imported through Japan and Yugu. When the ministers immediately understood, Hyang added, "Are there water buffaloes only found in Gangnam? Although they exist in the southern region of Japan and Yugu, I heard that water buffalo are common in Daewoo, Daejeon, and Siamragok, Thailand's old name. In particular, in the case of Siamragok, envoys came during the reign of King Taejo, but there was no proper trade after that. What's the reason? Isn't it because you didn't know the way to get there?" At Hyang's words, all the ministers gasped in exclamation. It was something that was also in their memories. During the reign of King Taejo, an envoy came from Thailand and offered tribute, and although King Taejo was also interested in trade, he did not achieve any significant results, and in the end, it ended with Yemuya, Yo-yo-yeah. No, Yemuya was also a good expression. At the time, most of the ministers thought, "I've been scammed." In addition, most of the ministers who ran the government from King Taejo to King Sejong believed that commerce was one of the biggest causes of Goryeo collapse. The government became corrupted as powerful families in league with merchants indulged in extravagance, and all of the damage fell on the powerless, ordinary people. Thanks to sharing such thoughts, the ministers of the government and the nobles of the private family moved as follows based on Neo-Confucianism. In order to avoid such a situation, noblemen must be frugal, and the country must be based on the principle of no effort, no effort, no effort. As they said, the main source of income for the noble class, who were intellectuals and landowners, was crops produced by farmers. In the end, the hardships of life for ordinary people, including farmers, did not change much. In the end, there was a conflict between the ministers and the government who ran the government based on that way of thinking, which led to the purge of the ministers, ambassadors, and ministers. In the end, Kyang's claim was accepted, and it was decided to obtain Jeonghwa's navigation records. Then, The envoy departed for Beijing with a cage containing falcons. Thank you for coming. The emperor's favor is in ruin. Under the reign of Emperor Yongle, the magistrates and subordinate magistrates bowed their heads with words of gratitude. Emperor Yongle, who was looking at the falcons in the cage with happy eyes, opened his mouth. Okay, I received something precious, so I have to repay it. But what does Joseon want? I want sulfur and copper. In response to the official's reply, Emperor Yongle looked back at the cabinet minister who had established the city. The great master should consult with the envoys and provide an appropriate amount of sulfur and copper. I accept the emperor's command. Emperor Yongle, who gave the order, looked at the Joseon envoys and opened his mouth. And is there anything else you want? I apologize, but I would like a copy of the record of the expedition conducted by eunuch Jianghua. Who? Jianghua's expedition records? After listening to the interpreter, Emperor Yongle showed curiosity. Why does Joseon want it? In response to Emperor Yongle's question, the emperor bowed deeply and explained the reason. We, Joseon, are a small country located in a corner of the vast world, and we do not know how wide the world is. Thanks to your majesty the emperor, such a small country came to know that there are many countries in this world. This alone is something to be ashamed of, but I have heard that Zhang He, under your majesty's orders, announced your majesty the emperor and the majesty of the empire to the four seas. We, Joseon, have come to know the wideness of the world thanks to the grace of your majesty and the empire. But we are like a frog that has just escaped from a well and does not know the wideness of the Yangtze River. Therefore, I want a copy of the record so that I can know the extent of the Dead Sea and the majesty of the empire that rested on the Dead Sea. It was a statement that made even the interpreter who delivered the words cringe. Of course, this line was not created by the ministers. This was a line that Qiang came up with during a mock conversation held by ministers, and even King Sejong. Qiang, who came up with that line, went back to his room and scratched his arms and grumbled. Cadet, it's so cringy that it makes me want to grow chicken skin. Chicken meat. I sucked it so wonderfully. That's what I said. Oh, chicken meat? Fuhaha. After hearing what was said through the interpreter, Emperor Yongle laughed loudly. Emperor Yongle wiped away the tears that had formed from laughing so hard and opened his mouth. This king of Joseon is truly virtuous. You don't know your fractions very well. Better than your father or grandfather. Joseon's envoys gritted their teeth at Emperor Yongrak's words. However, the envoys tolerated this and bowed their heads. Huang-un is devastated. Okay, a small country in the corner wants to know the extent of the Dead Sea. Make a copy and send it to Joseon. I accept the emperor's command. When the Emperor Yongle's order was given, Joseon's envoys raised their arms and shouted. Huang-un is devastated. Long live, long live, long live. That is how the records written by Jianghua came to Joseon. The problem was that the original came, not a copy. Is this an administrative error? Isn't this a problem? When not only King Sejong, but also the ministers were worried about encountering a completely unexpected problem, Jifianjian scholar, who was opening another chest, found a seal. Here is the seal. The magistrate of Yezhou, who received the sealed seal in an expensive silk envelope, opened the seal, read the contents, and tilted his head. Something? Here is a letter from the cabinet secretary. Give it to me. King Sejong, who received the letter from the royal inspector, read the contents and looked even more incomprehensible. I don't know anymore. Qiang intervened in the reactions of Yezhou Pansio and King Sejong. Can Soja read it? Okay, I want to read it. After receiving the letter, Qiang immediately checked the contents. The content of the letter was simple. This has gone through legal procedures, so Joseon should not be suspicious and should not inquire. Qiang tilted his head after reading the contents of the letter. No matter how I look at this, I feel. No matter how many times I read it, this was the mood the sentence gave off. Just leave it there. Because it's not stolen goods. Just leave it there. And don't open your mouth. Sure. I told you to just leave it there. As Qiang fought over and over again, she recalled a memory from the 21st century and muttered to herself. As expected, it was Gai Ryuk, Jile? What do you mean? Crown Prince, do you understand what I mean? When Sejong, who heard Qiang muttering to himself, asked a question, Qiang nodded. Yes, this is my personal opinion, but, Qiang began to explain. The reason I thought incense was Gyaruk was because of a lecture given by a professor of Chinese history, which I took as a liberal arts subject in college. A professor whose major was Ming and Qing explained the Great Expedition of Purification as follows. Why did Emperor Yang let go on a great expedition through Zhonghua? To know that, you must first know how Emperor Yongle came to power. As you all know, the Yongle Emperor came to power through a change of tribulation. Like most leaders who came to power through a coup, they needed their achievements to boast about to the people of Yongnak Island. So what I chose was the Great Expedition of Mongol Subjugation and Purification. But why wasn't Jianghua's Great Expedition, said to be the greatest adventure of the 15th century, repeated later? If you think about it a little, the famous Age of Exploration could have appeared first in Asia, not Europe. This is because the form of foreign trade at the time was not trade but tribute trade. Even if you go to a faraway country, there won't be much left behind. On the contrary, even if the messenger comes, it is of no use. Considering the funds that went into Jianghua's Great Expedition, tribute trade is not the answer. Once you go on a voyage and come back, you have to give various rewards, repair broken ships, and build new ships that have sunk. Would this be worth a penny or two? And what was important to Emperor Yongle was the foreign cultural relics brought by Zhang He through his voyage. It was important to show off one's dignity through exotic items. In the end, the voyage itself was not important. That's why, after the death of Emperor Yongle, his subjects destroyed the records of the expedition. I'm afraid that the new emperor will see that record and start making money again. Because of this, Ming's subjects must have thought this was a good idea. King Sejong and the ministers all nodded at Yang's explanation. It certainly will. I guess so. An expedition requires a huge amount of money. Such an expedition was carried out simultaneously on land and sea. The expedition on land, that King Sejong referred to, was the subjugation of the Mongols. There were 4 subjugations since Emperor Yongle took the throne, and there were rumors that another subjugation was being prepared this year. When he found out the reason why the original came instead of a copy, Yejo Pansio opened his mouth. If it's so difficult for a country to erase its records, shouldn't we do it too? Several ministers nodded in response to Yejo Pansio's question and smelled incense. We are different from people. The Ming trade in the form of tribute and gifts, but we must move in the form of mutual trade. Mutual trade? Simply put, it's uphill. The scent was explained in more detail. At first the diplomatic envoy will move, but after that it will move around the top. Because the upper commerce is centered, it becomes a trade where we exchange goods that the other country needs and goods that we need. It is not a tribute trade like the Ming dynasty. What is the role of coordination here? 1. Providing means of transportation, protecting the top, and collecting fees and taxes in this process. 2. Stabilization of prices through the resale of goods essential to the lives of the people. Judge Hojo tilted his head and intervened in Yang's explanation. An item that is essential to the lives of the people? Is there such a thing abroad? A considerable amount of this is already happening in our country. No, even if I wasn't born in Joseon, would it really be of any use since I'm already used to not having it? King asked back at Judge Hojo's words. Old man Hopan, don't you know about pepper? Ah. In response to Yang's question, all the ministers, including the minister of Hojo, showed expressions of understanding. Pepper, brought in by Arab merchants during the Goryeo dynasty, was a top-class spice. Garlic and ginger were used to neutralize the spicy smell of the meat, but pepper was a powerful spice that could completely change the flavor of the dish, even in small amounts. And it was that expensive. Thanks to this, most people who did not have money had to eat mainly chancho, chanjiao, chipinamal. After hearing Yang's explanation, Pansio Hojo nodded and continued to ask questions. I understand that you used Hojo as an example, but is it really necessary to import such a product? If we do it wrong, the risk of the people spending their money to buy such products increases and the country's wealth drains away. There is a risk of that. However, when people have more money, they start looking for good things to eat and wear. However, if you blindly block the outflow of wealth, smuggling will increase. Because it is a smuggling trade, people will pay more to buy it due to the risk, which will cause a vicious cycle of increasing prices. No, it would be fortunate if a vicious cycle of prices simply rising occurred. In order to hide smuggling, officials will be bribed. It's the famous frog price. What do you think will happen then? Corruption will be rampant. Okay. Judge Hojo nodded at Yang's explanation. Before merchants were officially involved in envoy travel, much of the trade with foreign countries was smuggling. Sejong, who was listening to the story next to him, nodded and listened to the story. It's the price of a frog, so I understand. Kang bowed her head in response to Sejong's praise. I am devastated. The price of a frog was a Chinese folktale related to Li Gubo, a civil servant during the reign of King Munjong of Goryeo. Tumbugi and Oriol were fighting over which of their voices was more beautiful. When they couldn't come to a conclusion, the two asked their neighbor's stork for a ruling. The stork, who was in charge of the ruling, asked for 3 days, and during those 3 days, Tumbugi offered frogs to the stork without the Oriol's knowledge. In the end, the stork sided with Tumbugi, and this is where the word Wario, Walal, came from. Funnily enough, King Sejong and his ministers knew about it from old records, but they learned about Hyang through their Korean language teacher in high school in the 21st century. There are things you guys get confused about sometimes. First of all, Wero and Saba Saba. At first glance, Wero sounds like Japanese and Saba Saba sounds like Korean, right? In fact, it's the opposite. Hyang, energized by Sejong's praise, continued speaking. I'll say it again, if Joseon becomes richer and stronger, the lives of its people will also become richer. When life becomes abundant, it is human nature to find good and delicious things little by little, no matter how frugal we are. Do you admit it?